City Council. For anybody, I think everybody here kind of knows, this is a little more informal process than a regular business meeting. There's copies of the agenda on the back there. It looks like we don't have to do the swap, Chris. So welcome everybody to our work session, and some guests of honor just arrived, so we'll stick with our original agenda. Before we go to public comment on any item that's on our agenda or not on our agenda this evening, just two quick announcements. First, the Mustangs start their game at 6:30 today. So if they win, they continue to the championship against Ogden. If they lose, they're out. So I declare that game updates on scores are in order at any point in the meeting for anybody who wants to educate the rest of us. Also, Wednesday morning at 8:30 is the beginning of the Saluting Branches effort at our Mount View Cemetery. It's just the first time we've had that. It's a great organization of landscapers in our community who dedicate their time and energy to care for cemeteries, in our case, Mount View Cemetery, in the veterans section. And they do that in recognition of our fallen vets, and we appreciate everything that they do. With that, though, we'll open it up for public comment on anything this evening. We will have an opportunity for public comment on each of the agenda items later. But if you have to leave, feel free to come forward at this time, either whether it's on our agenda or not. Is there any public comment at this time? There's no one online, I believe, indicating, and there's nobody coming forward. So we'll close the public comment period and move into our first item, which is update on our Family Justice Center. Chris, I think you probably want to make some introductions, or Katie. It's all yours.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Katie Nash. I'm one of the domestic violence investigators with the Billings Police Department. As Council knows, back in last spring, the city decided to contract with the Family Justice Center Alliance to start working through a discussion of the possible development of a Family Justice Center here in Billings to help serve the victims and survivors of family violence in our community. And so in June, we had a team from the Family Justice Center Alliance come out to work with the community on a study tour to kind of assess where we're at, if this is something the city and the survivors want to see happen. And so we have members of the Alliance, Ken Shetter and Jill Bring, back here to talk about the study tour, and then to let you guys know what's going to happen with the strategic planning session that is set to kick off tomorrow. So I will turn it over to them.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. We are very honored and excited to be back. And I personally want to thank you for giving me a reason to come back to Montana, which is one of my favorite places now. We have been very impressed with your community's readiness to go down this path of developing a Family Justice Center, which is our primary job when we come do this study tour, is to really assess your readiness, but also to identify potential gaps or particular challenges, particular opportunities in a community, and to kind of help create a roadmap to move forward with the development process through the strategic planning. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details about what we found. We did issue a report that I know some of you, I'm sure, have read through, but if you haven't, we issued a report in the form of a letter, and I would encourage you to take a look at that. But first and foremost, we found that this community is ready to move forward with the development of a Family Justice Center. And I always like to start with what we heard from survivors. And the good thing is this, that our survivors had really a lot of good things to say about the people that serve them in this community, about the agencies that serve them. There is a great degree of trust that's already built up, particularly around with your social service agencies. And that's a great thing to build on. We also talked to survivors about the idea of developing a Family Justice Center, about the idea of putting all the services in one place. And just like everywhere we've ever been, every survivor here said yes. we would absolutely love to get all of our services in one place. And not surprisingly, not one person said, no, I would rather go all over town to get my services. But survivors were also very appreciative of the effort that you are embarking upon in this community, and they were excited about continuing to be a part of the process. So a couple of the things that we particularly found that I'm specifically excited about and optimistic about was that there is existing here in Billings a willingness, a readiness, and even an enthusiasm about collaborating and working together, which is where it all has to start, right? Because in the long history, well, actually the kind of short history of the development of family justice across the country, earlier on it was more common that a lot of agencies were not excited about getting out of their silos. A lot of agencies were not excited about having to work, hand in hand, side by side with individuals and with agencies where there wasn't a history of that. We've come a long way, generally speaking, in this country, and it helps that there have been more than 100 family justice centers that have been developed, and that we know the framework works, and that we are saving people's lives with the model. So that helps that we can demonstrate that. But I didn't see any of the reticence or concern or territorial jealousies or complications that are going to make this process more difficult. Everybody here is ready to work together. And if they aren't, they're embarrassed to say it, which is a good thing. So that's the first thing that has to happen, and we saw that everywhere we looked. I was actually surprised at the degree to which the YWCA was enthusiastic about the partnership and was open to the possibility of facilities being on their property. And they were just more all in than I certainly anticipated, and I thought that was an incredible positive. I also, one of the things I look for is agencies that are well situated to sort of pick up the mantle and provide services for children. And in particular, I think it's important to develop a Camp Hope America program, and it's better to do it early in the process rather than late. And we saw some good candidates for developing a Camp Hope America program, and it always, I think, is helpful when whoever's going to be the lead agency doesn't have to, at the same time, develop the Camp Hope America program, because that takes some of the pressure off. And so I was excited about the possibilities there. The one thing I'll say in terms of a challenge, well, there are two things that are a challenge. There are some gaps in services in this community. Every community has gaps in services, so I don't want to overstate that. But probably for a city your size, there are some, probably a few more gaps in services. I don't even want to call them out here tonight, because I don't want that to become sort of a mental block or a barrier. I just want you to know that part of this process will be a discussion about how we can use the development of a family justice center to help fill some of those gaps in services. What we won't do is say, oh, there's not enough housing, we're not ready to develop a family justice center yet. That's not the way to do this. This is an opportunity to think about how do we bring more resources to bear. It's also an opportunity to realize a lot of efficiencies, to leverage resources, and you're going to figure out ways that you can do more than you thought you were going to do. So the other challenge is, and like this is a challenge everywhere, but while everybody is ready to collaborate, I'm not sure everybody in the community or every agency really kind of fully grasps the level of collaboration that we're talking about. And so I think one of the things that we'll focus on over the next 2 days is bringing some of those future partners in the Family Justice Center project sort of further along in their understanding and their intentions about what collaboration looks like. So there are some folks at the table that it's great that they're at the table and the right people are there, but now what I'd like to see is sort of a greater commitment for a greater level of collaboration. There also may need to be some sort of policy changes in how the community looks at serving domestic victims of domestic violence and children who are exposed to domestic violence, how domestic violence cases are prosecuted, what the criminal justice response looks like, what the civil justice response looks like. So it's not just about bringing everybody, all the services into one place. It's also about looking at your systems and examining things from a big picture policy and process level. And so there are some things I think that y'all should look at with that. There definitely need to be more sophisticated and comprehensive services provided for children who witness domestic violence, which is true almost everywhere, but it's true here for sure. And I think you will need to develop more comprehensive and sophisticated services for victims of strangulation, victims who have experienced strangulation as well. But that is an integral part of this process. And fortunately, there's really great work being done across the Family Justice Center movement in serving survivors of strangulation. So over the next 2 days, we are going to have, hopefully, all of the stakeholders in this community who are involved with serving survivors in the room together. And that includes, decision makers. It includes people on the front lines. But we're going to get together and we're just going to do some really intensive visioning. So that we'll begin with kind of a presentation that's similar to the community forum that some of you attended when we were here for the study tour, but for those who weren't here. And this time you won't be stuck with me. I'm excited that our president and the founder of the Family Justice Center movement, Casey Gwen, is coming in town tonight, and he will lead the strategic planning process and the visioning process. But we will quickly move into this visioning where this community is going to decide. You're going to create a vision for what you want your Family Justice Center to look like. We did not come here to say, here's how you should do it. We will lead you through a process where you decide what you want your Family Justice Center to look like. And we're going to get real specific. We're going to get into what does it look like and feel like to a survivor when they pull up to the building, when they walk inside. Who's there to greet them? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What are the services that are going to be there and available? Who are the agencies that need to be there to provide those services? Are there some instances where there's a service, but we don't have an identified potential partner agency, and we're going to have to figure out together how to fill that gap in service? And so that's going to be your vision. It doesn't mean we won't be there to provide some context and answer questions, but this is going to be your community's vision. We will go through a similar exercise to decide what your core principles, your guiding principles and core values are. We will spend some time with a similar exercise identifying blocks and barriers. And these exercises, by the way, are not about what does our Family Justice Center need to look like in 6 months or on day one when we open the doors. This is a 5-year vision. This is, if we wake up in 5 years and we are doing everything that we can imagine doing the best we can do for survivors in this community, what does that look like? That's the vision that we're going to cast, right? And I think I told you before, I know I said it about 100 times during the study tour, and I'll say it every time I get an opportunity over the next 2 days as well. I would just challenge you all to think about how survivors feel about the vision that's cast, right? Because one of the things that I know is true from talking to your survivors and from talking to survivors all across the country, and I learned it for the first time when we did focus groups with survivors in Fort Worth, Texas, when we started down this process. and that is that survivors feel disrespected. They first feel disrespected by their abuser. They often end up feeling disrespected by their kids when their kids start to sort of mimic the behavior that they've learned from their abusive parent. And then they ultimately often feel disrespected by the systems that are built to serve them, because we don't always do our best. And we have a way of implicitly blaming survivors and victims for the problem of domestic violence. So what I will say to you over and over again is, do this in a way that survivors feel like that you're communicating to survivors that they're worth the investment, right? Because they are. And at the end of the day, you can't afford to not do this, and you can't afford to not do it right. So that first day is going to be all about visioning. The second day, we're going to get into some of the more detailed work. We have identified through the study tour process a number of work groups that we think you need to create that will figure things out at a real granular level. So there is, for example, a service delivery work group, and one of their biggest challenges is going to figure out what does a centralized intake look like, and who does the centralized intake, and how do we do it in a manner so that we're able to share information across multiple agencies but still protect the confidentiality that is so important to survivors. And so we will, and you'll have identified the chairs and co-chairs of those work groups. And so on day 2, we will have 2 or 3 rotations of those work groups where you'll begin to just, actually what the work groups will do for the most part is figure out what the key questions are that they need to get to work on right away. And so all the participants will get to pick a couple of different work groups that they want to sort of test drive and decide ultimately what where they want to land in terms of work groups that they can be part of through this process. We also are going to have a working lunch. I don't remember if it's day 1 or day 2. Day 1, tomorrow we'll have a working lunch where I'll talk to you about 2 things that I think are specific needs in being more comprehensive and sophisticated about serving children who witness domestic violence and also adult victims who experience strangulation. Well, we're going to do workshops on those 2 topics. Casey will lead a workshop on strangulation, and you'll get just an hour of a sense of the work that we do. And I know y'all have hosted training from our institute here previously, so some of you are pretty familiar with that. But Casey will do a quick but pretty deep dive into serving survivors of strangulation, and then I will do a quick but pretty deep dive on serving children exposed to domestic violence. And so after we've done the work group rotations, and we have an opportunity for the chairs to report out on the work of their groups, and we'll also have some makeup work to do, I'm sure, from all the early visioning that we did. And of course, one of the things we'll do is when your visions get posted on the wall, everybody's vision, and then we've got to organize that kind of as we go through the couple of days, and we're going to make sure we're getting that right as we go. But then the conclusion of our strategic planning process is one of the more important parts, and that is where we ask every participant to make a commitment. We ask participants to make commitments on behalf of their agencies that they represent, but more importantly, to make a personal commitment. To put in writing what they are going to do personally to support the development of the Family Justice Center and put their name on it. And then they hand that probably to Katie is who we're going to ask them to hand that to, because they all know that Katie will come after them and hold them to account for the commitments that they make. And then we will, just as we provided a study tour letter, we will provide a bit more formal strategic planning report about 30 working days after the conclusion of the strategic planning. And it will be a summary of what happened over the 2 days. It will be a very specific sort of distillation of the vision that you all have created, so that can serve as a guide moving forward. And then again, we will provide a list of recommendations. It may be that we identify another working group that hasn't been yet put in place, just because of what we learn over these 2 days. And a lot of people want to know, well, when should we expect to open the doors to a family justice center? Soon is my answer. It doesn't mean that soon and very soon you will open the doors to the grand ultimate family justice center that is consistent with the vision that you create over the next 2 days. That's the dream big part, and you'll do that someday, and sooner than you think. But as much as we believe in dreaming big, we also believe in starting small, because we know that the perfect can be the enemy of the good. And if you try to go for perfect to open your doors, that's a great way to sabotage the success of a family justice center. And the other good thing about it is, well, there's two other things, reasons that you should start small, but start earlier than what you think. There are people who need you today. It makes me kind of crazy to think about when we wait to do things, big things, important things, serving survivors, and we say, well, we're going to have to plan this out, and we're going to have to do this. We're going to wait for this, and we're going to wait for this, and we're going to wait for this funding, and we're going to wait for these partners to get ready. A lot of people suffer in that interim period because there are a lot of people that will come in and be served through a family justice center and who will benefit from the collaboration that would suffer but for the opening of the Family Justice Center. So part of our conversation will be, what does starting small potentially look like? And it's a smaller number of partners, probably a smaller facility. It might not even be, 5 days a week, but y'all can decide what that looks like for you too. Okay, said a lot. Any questions?
Very good. Thank you, Ken. Again, thank you for all of your efforts. Council members, tomorrow, the YW beginning at 9 o'clock, a little bit before, if you want something to eat, till about 3:30. Everybody is welcome. Come learn something and stay as long as you can. Questions for Ken? Councilmember Shaw, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you. Hopefully this is a quick one. I can't come for the entire time, both days, although I will be able to pop in and out. Do you have a recommendation for us on, are there any particular times or
I think,
sets that would be most helpful to have council there?
yeah, I think for anybody, I would say be there for the visioning piece when you're crafting the vision, which will be kind of start mid to late morning tomorrow, and generally go through the day. But the first part of that, the first 2 to 3 hours of that are the most important. If you miss the blocks and barriers and overcoming blocks and barriers, that doesn't give me heartburn. There will be plenty of people to identify blocks and barriers. But I think being a part of that visioning exercise is good because I think, well, I know you all have a lot to contribute to that, but I also think it would give you a great perspective as being some of the key policy makers and ultimate decision makers in this. It'll give you a great perspective on what people are thinking.
Thank you. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have this question, and sometimes my questions take a minute, so I'll try. How do you've created these family justice centers across the United States, and there's a varying, I would say, subcultures within the United States. There are many different cultural aspects of communities. So in this process of creating the vision, how do you know that the people who are there are representing, say, economically marginalized communities or ethnic, racial communities so that they're part of that visioning? Thank you.
That's a great question. And if the folks that are doing the visioning, if among that group you don't have good representation of the people that you serve, then you're going to miss a lot. So it's one of the things I know Katie and Ellie really focused on as they were sending out invitations and begging and pressuring people to come be part of this strategic planning. They thought a lot about what it's not what your general population looks like necessarily. It's what is the population of people who are served in this community. And it's also interesting to note, one of the things I think we all found most interesting is how different the demographics of the population of people that were served by social service agencies and not by law enforcement or prosecution. Those are two very different populations, right? But you have to make sure that all of those folks are well represented, for sure. And so one of the keys here is going to be to make sure that the tribal communities are represented. And I know that your team has worked hard on that. And the other thing I will note is it's important to, your social service agencies that are providing those direct services start out with a really good perspective of particular challenges in serving individuals in those communities. And so that you start out in a good place. That's very helpful. And that was clear to us during the study tour, is that even for those individuals who might not share demographic characteristics with a lot of the folks that they served, they were keenly aware of the special challenges in serving particular populations. So that's one thing that is helpful, but it's not enough. You need those communities to be represented by being present during the strategic planning or during this process. It's one of the reasons we think the inclusion of survivors is so critically important. That it was one of the benefits of working with survivor focus groups when we're here for the study tour. And I expect that we will have survivors that will be part of this process as well. The other thing is this: we will kind of take stock of, who was there and who was not during the strategic planning process. And if we find that there was a group that was missing that provides a key perspective, then one of our recommendations will be, as you move forward, you're going to have to be very intentional about bringing this group into the strategic planning process. And because the next 2 days is not the whole enchilada, right? The strategic planning and the development keeps moving forward after Wednesday. So we will account for that in our report and in the post-strategic planning if we find that during these next 2 days, not everyone is here that needs to be here. And sometimes that happens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ken? Councilmember Nice.
Thank you, Mayor. Ken, it's good to hear that there's a lot of support amongst the community groups and members, and I frankly have to say this is still a little bit of a mystery to me, but I understand we have other coalitions of groups coming together, and they don't always play well together. So what is it that you are, I guess in your experience of other family justice centers, what is the best practice? What is done to make sure the players all play well and don't take their ball and go home?
I think you need to approach it from a couple of different angles, right? First of all, you need to know that you owe an accountability to all these different groups, because you're asking them to do something that's hard. You're asking them to give up some measure of their autonomy. I mean, they're still going to govern their own agencies. They're ultimately have responsible for their own agencies. You're not going to usurp that. But in coming together, at least by appearance from the outside looking in, there is potentially a loss of some autonomy. You're asking some individuals to leave the mothership of their organization and to come work as part of this team. That's a risk from a career standpoint, right? So you have to honor the commitment to collaboration that all these individuals and agencies are making, because it's hard. It's that level of change is hard. And so you have to recognize it. You have to give people the space to give voice to it, to give voice to their concerns. And you have to be authentic in your space for listening, in the sense that when there is a concern that's completely legit, you need to recognize that and account for it in your planning to make sure agencies are protected and that the missions of all of the agencies are protected. So it involves it's not just open-mindedness of all the potential partners, but it's open-mindedness on the part of the individuals and the agencies that are leading the effort as well. And you have to remember, whoever ends up being the lead agency, it is your job and your job only in terms of sort of mission being what's mission critical to ensure that this high-level partnership flourishes, right? Every other agency's mission is to do their thing, right? So it's always a little bit harder on whoever is leading the process. Some of my folks that work for me are like, why are we always the ones that are apologizing, or why are we always giving in on something? And it's like, because it's not their job to make sure that this partnership works. That's our job. And so you do have to lean over backwards to make sure that you are that you're being understanding of some of the difficulties that can arise here. And then you have to create accountability in your governance structure. So at least early on, all of the partners should have a voice in the governance of the Family Justice Center. It doesn't mean they usurp the authority of a board of directors, or it doesn't mean that they usurp the authority of the city council if it's a city-led Family Justice Center. But they need to be, you need to have probably a steering committee where the either the lead executives or their appointees serve as part of this steering committee, and they are an official part of your governance structure, so that they know, they have some comfort that if something comes up, there is a way for them to address it. So I will tell you, we started with that in Fort Worth because all of the CEOs of our partner agencies were very nervous about this. And after about a year, they didn't want to meet anymore. They're like, this is, and so we finally just disbanded it. They finally got to a point they were that comfortable. And we still have to this day, and we recommend for everybody that there are at least monthly partnership meetings where whoever is the highest ranking person on site for every agency is part of a meeting every month where everybody has the opportunity to talk through any issues that there may be.
Okay, thank you.
And there is a governance. One of the work groups is going to be tackling governance issues, and so that's one of the questions they'll need to ask is how do we make sure we are accountable to the partner agencies in this?
Very good. Any other questions for Ken before we say see you tomorrow? I don't think so.
Thank you. One last thing I'll just tell you is one of the things that makes this community unique in the planning process is not only the level of commitment of the city, but the level of commitment and involvement of the individuals that are serving on the city council. So I would commend you all for that and tell you that you're a big part of this success so far. You'll be a big part of the success moving forward, and we're honored to get to work with you.
Thank you, and welcome back again. Go enjoy your evening. Every day in Billings is 70-some degrees, so just enjoy it.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Come back in February, and we'll prove it to you. Okay. All right, we do have an opportunity for public comment on this item on our agenda. Is there any public comment on item number 1? No one's coming forward. No one's online. A little follow-up, Councilmember Trickey?
Yeah, on a related topic, I just wanted to hand out the flyer for the 34th Annual McGuire Conference, which is happening at the end of the month on the 28th and 29th of September. So if you're interested in this is an opportunity for people who are working in this area to get together and educate each other, and it's a great group of people to be working with.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes then item number 1. Bringing us to item 2, or crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED presentation. Chris, John, who wants to kick us off?
So Mayor, I'll kick it off and pretty quickly here turn it over to John. As you are well aware, and the conversation is this evening's agendas, like many of ours, back it up. Improving the safety of Billings remains, our top priority. We knew back in 2021 and before 2021, when we did our peer review of our public safety departments, that we would community will never have the resources, nor necessarily should they want to have the resources to put a police officer at every corner, right? That's not going to happen. This is a community issue. And so, though we were able to add significant resources directly in the area of law enforcement, crime prevention through environmental design was one of several areas to overall improve the safety of our community. So John is going to hit the high points of what we're doing organizationally to be deliberate about what we learned at the SEPTED training and how to implement that across our organization and community. And then, frankly, Nick Miller is going to go from there. Nick shared with the cross-disciplinary team 8 weeks ago, the work that he's doing in the Parks Department, and frankly, it was infectious, and we said, Nick, we got to get you in front of the city council and the public to see the work that you're doing. So that's the intent tonight. John's going to take about 5 minutes, hit the overall, how we're making progress, and then he's going to hand it over to Nick so you can see some very specifics in one department that's been doing work before we did the SEPTED training and after it as well. So, John.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Mayor and Council, good evening. In May of this year, city staff attended the SEPTED training that was put on by the city and the Chamber of Commerce. And out of that meeting, one of the outputs was meeting with Chris and deciding that the best approach was to have a small strategic committee with a handful of city staff from various departments and divisions across the city. So like anything, it's an iterative process, but this is what we've decided on as of this point, and we wanted to share that update with you. So crime prevention through environmental design is a design ethos and approach that looks at design and management of the environment, both built and natural, right? So it's the architectural side of things, and then it's the facility management side of things. The objective is to be intentional about the approach and implementation of the core principles of SEPTED to deter and reduce crime and subsequently improve quality of life. So why is this important? One, it provides value. It's a cost-effective way to prevent and reduce crime. And there's studies out there that show this works and it's effective. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If something's out there that works, we should take advantage of it. It's an all-inclusive approach, right? It's not just a police issue, it's a community issue. So we're demonstrating a shared commitment and a shared understanding of trying to solve this problem together. And also there's opportunity to be deliberate about our approach, to be more effective in our implementation of crime reduction strategies, and then also to foster stronger partnerships within the community, such as Riverstone Health, DBA, Chamber, renewal districts, and then private business and property owners. What are we doing? Our first action item is to prioritize. So we analyze 911 dispatch call statistics for various city sites, and then the type and number of calls across the specific sites. We use a scoring matrix to select specific locations, and some of those metrics are usage, number of visitors, hours of operation. How much is the community engaging with these specific locations? Our next step is to assess. So we go out and we conduct assessments at selected sites, and one of the outputs of that is to produce a report that has a summation of our findings of the assessment. And then third, we go out and we actually do those improvements. So we determine which improvements to implement, execute that tactical work associated with those improvements, whether it's something like Nick does within the parks or contract administration. And then additionally, we want to look beyond the city budget for various other funding options. And then the goals and the outputs for the City of Billings SEPTED strategic plan are, one, to effectively reduce opportunities for people to commit crimes and then reduce the image of blight within the city. Two is to increase public usage and engagement of spaces and the safety of the community. Three is to encourage new and innovative crime prevention strategies. And then finally, to improve social cohesion, public safety, and livability. So on a very high level, that's our plan. Questions before I turn it over to Nick?
Any questions for John? Big picture? No, but don't go away. We might come back to you. Oh, Councilmember Nish, you had something?
Yeah, just real quick, can you expound on what do you mean by social cohesion?
Yeah, so what I mean by social cohesion, Councilmember Nice, is specifically the the connectivity of all the residents of Billings. How connected are they? Are they engaging with social spaces? Are they engaging with other members of the community within the spaces?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In fact, as Nick comes up and gets set up, I would say one of those primary examples is we were very deliberate, you were deliberate, in the Parks Trails Rec bond that there are 5 community centers. Those 5 community centers were deliberately placed in northeast, south, east, west core to provide more opportunities both for the city and our partnering agencies around the community to provide activities to activate spaces. That fits directly in line with parks in and of themselves don't make for safer places. Active, engaged park and open spaces do. So it's one of those examples.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Miller. I've been with the city for 5.5 years now. I started off as a equipment operator and then got promoted to horticulturist for our parks department here. About 2.5 years ago-ish, I became certified in ZEPTED because I thought it would be important for the future of the parks department, and it turns out it might be. So here's my presentation, Urban Planting, Plants for the People. I'm going to give you a brief overview of kind of what I've done already in the parks department in a few areas over the last few years and how I think it's made an impact.
Doesn't always work.
Okay. So ZEPTED in our parks are vital community spaces. Public safety is crucial for everybody and enjoying those spaces. It's kind of what we're striving to do right now within the Parks Department. Crime prevention, our parks are an important step, I think, in the reduction of crime within our city. And then you can see the benefits that ZEPTED within our parks can bring: physical activity, improved mental health, social cohesion, and the environmental impacts that can have. And it has to be community orientated. This won't work within our parks unless we involve members from our community that surround the parks. So I think it's really, really important that we keep involving community members in the things that we do within our parks, otherwise it won't work. So with that being said, this is what I'm currently doing right now within our parks to create a safer environment, using all the ZEPTED principles that I've learned, and through the trial and error over the years of what's worked and what hasn't worked within Billings, increasing the ownership of those spaces. I'm always striving to include people in our projects that we do. I'm looking for opportunities to do that. And then I want common sense solutions. I don't want to think so hard that I'm overthinking what we can do. If it's removing a plant, let's just remove it instead of putting in something that's just going to be a problem later on. And then again, creating opportunity. I'm always looking to involve people in the projects that we do. Trial and error. You'll see in a slide later that I tried to do something and it didn't work, so I had to go back to the drawing board and then try again. First thing we're going to go over is the North Park Center, excuse me. We had problems there, a lot of problems along the building. So some of those problems were we needed to open up our sight lines to the building so you could see along the building. We needed to include hostile plant material, expanding our plant beds, and then activating that space. So what can we do to involve people kind of in that space a little bit better? We made it an Arbor Day project, which was really cool. A lot of people showed up and helped with that project. And then I had to find out, is it working? The improvements I made to the center, is it working? Is it not working? And that involves talking to the seasonals in the Parks Department, people that use the center, and then our full-time staff. What are you seeing? What are you not seeing? So here is a picture before and after of what the center used to look like. At the door, we added rocks so people could sit down while they wait for things. I'll tell you right now, they get used a lot by the YMCA kids. The plant material in there, the back of it is hostile. Okay, that's a barberry, so it's going to be kind of prickly. But then I also have some things that smell really nice, like a mock orange and some aronia that people can enjoy while they sit on the rocks. And then here's the other side, same concept, rocks for people to sit on, hostile plant material, really cleaned it up. So we used to have a problem with debris and other things along the building. We no longer have that problem. Now that we've opened up those sight lines and those site pictures, we don't have that problem anymore with things ending up behind the bushes or on the building. So I'm going to talk to you about downtown. Same thing. We got site picture problems. Things were being discovered. Things were being hidden. The plant selection wasn't the best. And then it was also using a lot of water. Our downtown plant material used a lot of water. Dogs are a huge problem in my line of work for downtown. And then people. Foot traffic's a big problem. Trash is a huge problem. But what we were finding when we did Broadway in Montana was a lot of weapons and drug paraphernalia. I saved most of the weapons from the rip out of Montana and Broadway, and when I laid them out on the bed of my truck, it took up the whole section of my truck. Since we've made the improvements, that's not a problem anymore. Same thing with the drug paraphernalia. We used to find a lot of drugs, a lot of needles. We don't really find that anymore. I went from picking up needles, I'd say about every 2 weeks, to now I pick up needles. It's been months and months since I picked up another one. Same thing with weapons. I haven't found weapons in years. Or alcohol bottles. I haven't picked up full alcohol bottles in years down on Montana Avenue or Broadway. So here's what the beds used to look like. Does this thing have a laser pointer on there? So what was happening is we would find stuff hidden here. And in the plant material here. And same thing. Juniper here. We'd find a lot of stuff hidden under here. In the crevices, all the grass. And this creeper right here was notorious for housing a whole bunch of bad things. This is what Broadway used to look like. That ribbon grass right there, we used to find all kinds of weird stuff in there. So it was a problem. We came up with a solution, tried it out. So this is a picture of positive and negative use, trial and error here. What's working, what isn't. Had to learn to adapt for downtown conditions. So this is a farmer's market. So this is my positive use there. I got people using the rocks to eat. Really like that. That's negative use. That right there is also negative use. They're trampling on my plants and all my hard work. But this fence in the back here obviously isn't working, right? So we have to come up with another solution. We have to do something different. So what we're doing isn't working. We thought it would work, isn't. So then came up with something else. So here's the solutions that we came up with for our downtown area. Raising our tree canopies. You can see now, right? That's super important. Creating natural barriers. We used rocks. Tiny ones didn't work. So what did we do? We got bigger ones. Those work. We added fencing. Super, super important for downtown. Raised our mulch lines. Once we raised that mulch up and we got rid of that hidey hole space, they stopped hiding stuff. And then smart plant design. You'll see in the pictures here coming up, the plant material used to overflow to the edges. I planted it right down the middle and made a beautiful line of color down Montana Avenue and all the beds. That's there for a reason. It's harder for people to reach that plant material and hide things in that plant material. So that's why we did it that way. And then community involvement. Super important to get people involved downtown. I love downtown. I love the work I do down there, and I want people to be invested in it as much as I am. So planting style, plant selection, super important. One of the really cool things that I love about Montana Avenue is a lot of them are wildflowers that you can find up in our mountains. So if you can't get to the mountains, you can go down to Montana Avenue and experience wildflowers that you can find. Same thing, Broadway's coming together. It's starting to look really, really beautiful. I'm excited about it. Nothing fancy. I'm not trying to create this botanical garden. I think I can achieve a real sense of beauty with the plant material that we have native to Montana. And then I'm building for the future. Once I'm done with the Parks Department, I don't want somebody to have to come in and fix a bunch of stuff. I want them to say, this was done right. This was done with a goal in mind. This was done the right way. And then my goals are, I wanted it to look cool. I think I've accomplished that maybe. Xeric, which means that it is drought tolerant. I think that's super important too. Not only does it look really good, but it's using less water, and to me that's very important. And then long blooming. I want people to enjoy this plant material and this flowers and this look for as long as they can throughout the season. But then some of it also has to be functional. Some of the intersections on Montana Avenue are more of a problem than others, so we put yucca in, solve those problems. So clump planting versus solo. Clump planting is what you're going to find on Montana Avenue. Variety of plants close together. I needed to do that so that it's harder for people to reach that stuff. Strong root mat makes healthier plants use less water, more room for error. If something's not doing the best, other things will take over. It's messy, but an appealing look, and then it's great for the environment. Solo planting lets the plants really shine. I have to be super selective on what I pick because it has to be big, beautiful, and bold. And then it's good for like rock beds and that kind of stuff like we have downtown. So Broadway, I wanted each intersection to be unique, solo planting, because we have a lot of trash and other things that end up in those beds. Good mix of sun and shade. I like some flashier stuff down there, but it is super, super harsh environment. So I'm always having to go back and try some new things if it doesn't work. So that's what it looks like now. It's a good example of solo planting. We got rid of all the ribbon grass. We threw some rocks in to mix things up. That's a bunch of shade material right there. And then I also want them to be like low maintenance plants for high maintenance people, because people have a tendency to not treat the plant material the best. So, but I think it looks great. And so these fences here, that was one of the solutions that we came up with, was add a permanent fence and then the bigger rocks. That fence is all recycled from tree wells that have been damaged over the years. We had a collection of them, so I turned them into fences for downtown. And then I asked the DBA to help me put them in, because I think it's important that they're also involved in the work that we do downtown. So Montana Avenue, again, I want every intersection to be unique. Super Harks, there's so many of them. I'm trying to turn it into a pollinator corridor. Every intersection is just gonna be loaded up with flowers for our pollinators. Same thing, I want xeric long blooming, clump plantings here, region-specific plant materials I'm also pulling from around Montana. And then again, I wanna bring the mountains downtown for people. So that's what Montana Avenue kind of looks like now, right? People can't reach the plant material. They'd have to really get in the bed to do that. The mulch line's all the way up, so you can't hide anything in the bed anymore. So again, like, we've pretty much solved that issue as far as weapons and drug paraphernalia. I don't really pick anything like that up anymore. Here's another look at it. This was the first pollinator bed that I put in downtown. Special place in my heart, this guy. So. And then here's, again, a before and after photo of kind of what we did down on Montana Avenue. Kind of a mess. There's no real, like, cohesion there. And now we have a bed that I think really fits the theme for Montana Ave. This is a cool project. So we put bird baths downtown for our pollinators, birds, and anything else that needs a drink during the hot summer. So we have the Audubon Center here, the DBA, a group of special needs kids from all of our local high schools, and the Parks Department all working together to decorate these bird baths and then install them downtown. I love this project. And then here we gave a tour of downtown to the special needs kids. We went out for ice cream afterwards. That was a whole bunch of fun. So we got to show them their bird baths after they got installed, as well as like all the plant material, and then I let them take a flower home. The next is a group of MSU students that are collecting seed for me. I collect all the seed from as many plants as I can down on Montana Avenue, and then I redistribute that seed back into our natural area parks. I'm always continuing to educate people about what we're doing downtown. I think that's super important. This is a plant walk from this year that I do every year for Pollinator Week. And then I'm also still doing yearly volunteer projects down on Montana Ave to keep people coming down there, to keep people engaged with Montana Avenue, as well as showing people that we care, right? I want groups down there working. I want people to see us working down there, to know that like we are still a part of Montana Avenue and we're still working to make it the best it can be. And then, yeah, the DBA helped me install the bird baths. Here's another photo of us working together to fill it up. As well as something I think is very cool, as long as bringing the wildflowers downtown, making it safer downtown. I've also managed to create habitat. So that's a predator species that has enough prey coming into that bed to survive, and I think that's really cool. Questions?
Great, Nick, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to applaud, but I don't know, we don't really do that, I guess, here. But great to hear your energy, and it's looking great. So thank you, and it's really exciting to hear that, however you put it, it's been years since you found weapons. I guess maybe we shouldn't be too thrilled about that, but it's a lot better than it was, and needles, and that's all great progress. So questions for Nick, Councilmember Gulick.
Hi, Nick. This is actually tangentially related. Just I'm reminded on the Montana Avenue planters where there was trees that we had to cut some of them down because they were not healthy. Is there enough soil? Like, do the roots go down below? Is there pavement at the bottom of those planters, or is there enough soil, I guess, for them to have a long life?
So the first pollinator bed I worked in, there was a dead tree in there. It had been dead for I'm not sure how long. So we removed that tree, and an interesting thing was there is a honey locust kitty corner from it. That honey locust root, I know what they look like, messed with them enough, had managed to work its way underneath the sidewalk and up into that bed. So there is no concrete bottom to those beds. As far as removing the trees, one of the goals of that project too was to increase color downtown, but also put in trees that do well in urban environments. So that was one of the main focuses of that plan, is that when we took out the choke cherries, we were going to put trees that are suited for a downtown environment, that can use the limited amount of resources that they have. So all the trees going in are suited for that.
Thank you. And I'll report to my wife who, she'll really appreciate the work you're doing with pollinators. So thank you.
Great, Nick. I'll just ask about volunteers. Is that something you seek out, volunteers, or don't really have a need for it, but probably hundreds, if not thousands of people are watching you right now. So if you wanted to make a pitch for that, this would be a good opportunity, but I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
So this year I decided I wanted to plant a bunch of native strawberry plants along the creek in Pioneer. And I said to myself, I could do that by myself, or I could involve the kids from senior in that. So I reached out and contacted the environmental science class and the environmental science club and had them come and help plant strawberries. I recently did a project up at Yellowstone Kelly's grave. Why not reach out and see who wants to come help, right? Like I said, I'm always looking for that. If I can involve a group of people in a project I'm going to do, especially plant material, because that's fun. Who doesn't want to like go plant flowers, you know? Yeah, anybody can come and I'll try to figure out something to do. Like I'm trying to plan something right now with WORC and somebody else to do some work in Destro Strip.
So if somebody's interested, should I talk to the volunteer coordinator at the Parks Department, or you, or?
Get a hold of Jake and he can direct you.
Okay, and they can just go to the city website and there's a staff directory, I believe, and just look up the volunteer coordinator for the Parks Department.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
There's actually a webpage on the Parks page.
And the Parks Department has its own webpage for volunteers. Councilmember Trickey adds. Any other questions? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I love that, really nice. Challenges. So there are a lot of different ways to try to activate a space. Have you found it difficult to activate spaces where there isn't much shade, plantings that are really attractive, maybe more challenging? I'm thinking maybe closer to the rims, or we have other areas. How do you really activate a space in terms of bringing community in where you don't have green grass, you don't necessarily have a lot of shade? Is that just a space where you're going to say, there are never going to be a lot of people who want to come here? Or are there ways that we can really motivate people to come to spaces that are somewhat harsh, let's say somewhat harsh? Thank you.
So we recently did a project up at Yellowstone Kelly's grave. This is one of those harsher environments that you're talking about. And it involved a bunch of mothers with their very, very young children. And what we did is we prepped the area for them. I'm trying to reintroduce native flowers to that area. And so it was a very fun project. The kids got to run around, throw seed all over the place. And the moms got to sit there and help rake it in. So that's a way of we're activating that space. So now they're going to take ownership in that space. Like, we put in all this work, we're always going to come back. Like the mom's like, we'll come back here every year and check on the plant material, right? And like, that's what these projects that I'm working on are striving for. I want people to want to come back to these spaces and look at their things. Like the people that help on Montana Avenue are always like, I'm always going to come back and check on my plant material. Same thing, the kids are taking ownership of the space down in Pioneer Creek. And then I plan to do more work up on the rims too as well, as far as reintroducing more plant material there.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Pearson?
So with this being through the auspices of CEPTED, because you're trained in it, what you're doing, does that add cost to the parks programs?
Most of the work down on, well, all of it done on Montana Avenue, for example, was paid through for the PMD.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Anything else for Nick or John? Not seeing anything. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Keep up the good work. We'll open up for public comment. Is there any public comment on item number 2, SEPTED implementation? Nobody is online. No one's coming forward. So we'll close the public comment period. Anything else from council before we move to item number 3? Don't see any. So item number 3 will be our policies for acquisition and sale of city property. I think that's going to be a joint effort led by Gina.
Mayor, if you would, I'm going to kind of just do an opening remark. So Gina's bringing forward kind of a new ordinance in relation to selling, exchanging, and acquiring property for the city of Billings, and a couple reasons why we're kind of bringing something forward. Number one, we always want to be in legal compliance. So when I had a first conversation with Gina, my thing was, let's do it as close as we can to what the business community and residential community is used to here, but can still, be in our legal compliance with the state code and everything. And number two, we want to maximize, the public benefit of whatever property, that we might be selling or acquiring or anything like that. And number 3 was the staff time. Believe it or not, we first brought you the resolution to sell this property here back in November of 22. That's how long we've been working on it with our current process, and trying to bring that, to some finality. And just some sub-bullet points underneath that is our business community is not used to our process. It's very cumbersome. They're not familiar with it. When they're not familiar with it, I don't think we're getting that maximum public benefit out of the property that we could be. So kind of teeing this off, that's why we're bringing you this. We have significant staff time that's involved, and we're also paying realtors to help us with this along the same time. And we think that we can, what Gina's bringing forward here can help and assist with that. So with that, I'll turn it over to her and let her go through the details.
Thank you, Gina.
Thanks, Kevin. Mayor and council, good evening. I have also asked Debbie and John, if John is staying through this presentation, to feel free to jump in, but Debbie's sitting in the back of the room. Apparently she isn't. The two of them, and Kevin as well, may jump in as they think necessary or appropriate. They may have more real life or practical examples that they could use to explain why we are doing some of the things we're doing. And as Kevin mentioned, this is certainly something that staff has discussed for quite some time. And so we think that this proposal addresses some of the issues that occurred during the process of either selling or obtaining property. The ordinance is intended to expand council's authority to dispose of property, and it will give you all some tools in doing that. It's nothing in here, or at least not much in here, is mandatory. A lot of it's permissive. It's just some enabling legislation for you to help effectuate these property sales and to effectuate certain kinds of property interests. So. Not working for you. You know what he did? It's not on. It's on.
Weak battery.
Oh.
Problem solved.
There we go. All right. Great. So we'll just kind of go through the proposed ordinance by section. I think that might be the easiest way. Maybe not all the sections, but most of the sections. And the first section that I want to talk about is 22-902, which provides the authority. Obviously, as you know, the authority rests with council to sell, exchange, or donate real property that belongs to the city. And this section also addresses exchanges in more detail and donations. As you know, attached to the staff memo is the current code section that exists, and it's just a really short section. And I can admit that the first time I read this, and Kevin and I had a few discussions about this, it's kind of confusing. It's not laid out very well. It's not written as well as it could be. So hopefully that is one of the things that we're addressing here with this proposal. So this first section that I want to talk about is expands the authority for council to sell, exchange, or donate property. It addresses exchange of real property and that the city may exchange property for property of an equivalent value, and if the properties are not of equivalent value, then council can approve an exchange. It doesn't have to just be for cash. It could be for something that council considers sufficient consideration. That just needs to be approved by a majority of council, so it doesn't necessarily have to be completely monetary. Sufficient consideration could include financial, something monetary, or a public benefit, as council may determine. It also addresses the sale, exchange, or donation between governmental entities, and that you can sell property, sell, exchange, or donate property at a reduced rate to another governmental entity if that property is going to be used for governmental purposes. And you can also include in the transfer, in the documents, the contractor, whatever transfer documents that are used, you can include conditions to provide for reversion if the property is not continued to use as according to any conditions that you may all approve. It also sets forth a list of circumstances when the city could donate or sell at a reduced rate. Those are the governmental purposes, if it's a property that is historically significant, provides for economic development as determined by council, affordable housing, emergency or transitional shelter, or for something that meets the sustainability goals of council. And all of these specific purposes, council may also, at your discretion, include in any transfer, provide for the reversion of the property, again, if it's not used in compliance with the conditions that are attached. With one exception, the historical significance is the one where the transfer actually must include that reversion, the reversionary language. Additionally, we've included some language that provides a delegation of authority to the city administrator to approve and finalize a sale, exchange, or donation with a market value within the limits of his signing authority, and that's already been established by a separate resolution. And that amount is $80,000, so that would hopefully take a few things off of your plate that you wouldn't necessarily need to approve and to see at every meeting. The next section is 22-903. This is the section that clarifies the process that's kind of set out in our current section 22-902, but it's a little confusing. So this section provides that essentially the first step is that council has to make a finding You'd have to make a finding that the property is no longer necessary to conduct city business, or it's for a public interest may be furthered by the sale, exchange, or donation. So if council were to make that finding with no fewer than 6 of your members, regardless of however many are present, I believe that's currently what's in the code right now. So we left it the same. No fewer than 6 of the council members make that finding, then you would approve a resolution of intent. And then the next step would be a subsequent public hearing, wherein there'd be all the notice, and you would actually hold a public hearing to make the actual determination whether the specific sale should be approved. Now, between those steps, the first, when you make the finding and pass the resolution of intent, and then the subsequent public hearing, there is a lot of time and process between there. It's not like at the next hearing, you wouldn't see this at the next regularly scheduled agenda. There's going to be a lot of time and process involved there. City staff would be engaging in either the bid process or negotiate a sale or have an auction. So there's some time and process there involved, and so you wouldn't see that right away. This section also, so as I mentioned, the finding has to be made by no fewer than 6 council members, as well as the final determination whether the sale should be approved. So that would have to be made by no fewer than 6 council members as well. This section also provides that you can start and stop the process in the middle. You could completely abandon and start over. You can pause and pick it up where you left off. It just provides some additional opportunity to do those kinds of things. The next section, 22-904, talks about the authority to obtain property. And council has previously approved a resolution. Let's see. It's a 2-page resolution, 21-10954, which provides some guidance for the purchase of real property. It mostly talks about the appraisals and that process. So this ordinance really elaborates and provides more options and opportunities for council, some additional tools. Let's see, additional requirements, excuse me, I'm in 22-904, to obtain property. So this section also includes the delegation of authority to the city administrator to approve and finalize real property purchases. And the language actually doesn't include exchanges, but the intent was to include exchanges there with an appraised value within his signing authority. The slide up there says all donation and exchanges would still need to be presented to council for approval. So that is the way the draft is written right now, that the city administrator would only be able to approve the purchases within the signing authority. But I guess my recommendation would be to include exchanges in that section as well as donations if you'd like. I know council likes to publicly acknowledge the donation, so perhaps you'd prefer to leave that out and have all donations come to you. So that's something to consider today, and let me know what you think about that. This section also provides that the city administrator could enter into leases on behalf of the city for purposes of providing facilities for city operations. And then we can move on to the next section, which is appraisals, 22-905. Oh, something happened. It's not over here. It's not the computer. It's the power. Okay.
I'm seeing green lights on the projectors.
Both of them have green lights on. Both of them.
But the TV's gone too, so.
We'll let Kevin work on it.
Okay.
Gina, we do have hard copies in front of
Yes.
us, or they're on our screens presumably.
Okay, so the next section is the appraisal section, which requires appraisals for city purchases, when the city purchases fee simple interest in real property. It provides some authority for the city administrator to waive the requirement, and there's some of that included as well in the resolution that currently exists. To waive the requirement if it wouldn't be prudent to incur the expense or delay of an appraisal and the purchase price is reasonably consistent with other indicia of market value. Sometimes it may not be worth it to get an appraisal on a piece of property that's value's not very great. So those would be the kinds of reasons that I think would be considered there. It also provides the exception for an appraisal when the transfers between another governmental entity, as long as the property is going to be used for governmental purposes. And appraisal would not be required for the acquisition of interests in rights of way or like for utility or road purposes. And it also has a requirement that the appraisal would need to have been done within a year prior to the final approval of the sale. Unless, of course, that's waived by council. There's a possibility that provides the allowance for you to waive that if you need to for some reason. The next section I was going to talk about was skipping to 22-908. Those other couple sections are some, the terms of sale, just setting forth that it's got to be for cash or terms approved by council, and provides for leasing of city property. And just briefly, the leasing section provides the same kind of authority and opportunities, I guess, for council to lease property at a reduced rate if the property is going to be used for public purpose, and that the city administrator can grant licenses for temporary use of certain property, which is just essentially codifying a current practice that's already used. So just moving on to easements, then 22-908. The city administrator can, this is the section that provides the more delegation of authority than what has existed. This is something that we're proposing after some discussions that we think it would improve some efficiencies, at least with staff time, if nothing else. It's my understanding that other municipalities use the same process, although I did not poll them, so I can't tell you which cities do and which cities don't. But the idea here is that the city administrator can accept a grant or dedication of real property rights of way or public infrastructure, and that the city administrator may grant rights of way for private, municipal, or public utilities across land owned by the city, and that the city administrator could authorize, subject to the availability of funds, the purchase of right of way for public infrastructure or public purposes. As you know, every time there's an acceptance of right of way or public infrastructure, any type of easement, it comes before council on your consent agenda. And like I said, these include a dedication of a right of way, and they're like for water, for sewer, for trails, or temporary easements for certain projects and construction projects. This would take those off of the consent agenda. Those are generally pretty straightforward. They're not controversial. They generally don't come off consent. They're usually approved as kind of a matter of course by council. So that is something that we've discussed that would improve some efficiencies and potentially could save a couple weeks up to, I don't know, potentially 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the agenda schedule, if there's a bye week or something like that. So that's something that we would like to see a change that we would like to see that's being proposed to you all. Finally, oh, there we go. It's kind of back here. It's not very bright, but this final slide is something that does not, is not in the current proposal, but after the packet went out and continuing to review this, it came up that it might be a good idea to include the condominium development. And so that section is, what I would propose is to add similar provisions that exist in the other sections. You know, first of all, granting the authority, council has the power to develop lands, building structures as a condominium for any purpose. You know, that it would need to comply with city code as well as state law. A sale or a lease could be approved, must be approved by council unless it's within the signing authority of the city administrator. That council could sell or lease units of the condominium at a reduced rate if the unit is to be used for public purpose. Some of those same things that you would see. It would also include a provision that the city administrator could act as a member of the condominium association for purposes like elections among unit owners or for board of directors, serving on the board of directors kind of thing. What I would also propose is that the city administrator would need to seek council approval for any matter to be addressed either as a unit owner or as a member of the board of directors with respect to anything that would obligate the city to an amount in excess of his signing authority, which again is the $80,000 threshold amount that's been previously established by council. So that's it in a nutshell. I think that this resolution, this proposed ordinance addresses a lot of the things that the city staff have seen and have struggled with over the last couple of years since I've been in this position. I've seen some confusion with regards to the current city ordinance that exists, and some clarification is really needed. This ordinance addresses both the disposition and acquisition of property instead of the two very brief, the code section and resolution that currently exists. It clarifies some things with regards to leases, particularly one question that is raised frequently is, do I have to take this lease to council for approval? The annual amount is less than $80,000, which is within the city administrator's signing authority, but when you look at the entire lease, the value is over that. So do I need to or don't I need to? And really either way, it's not addressed. So I always pretty much tell the staff need to bring it to council, but that's something that is clarified in here that would allow the city administrator to approve some of those leases, and that wouldn't have to come to you. This addresses exchanges and donations and sales at reduced rates, essentially just codifies and clarifies some of the current practices that are used and delegates some authority that already exists, but delegates it more clearly in this ordinance. And then, as I've mentioned throughout, some additional authority that we think would improve some of these processes. And that is all I have.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Council, what I would propose here is if we just open up to questions, we're going to be bouncing back and forth, in and out of sections, back and forth, trying to find out where we are. So what I would propose is we just start at the beginning and kind of go one section at a time, try to deal with those subjects in those sections as best we can. It's not going to be a perfect system. Before we just start assuming that's okay, before we start at the beginning with the recitals, any overall comments that don't deal with a particular section that somebody wants to address? I saw Councilmember Gulick's finger, Councilmember Neese, and Joy too.
Yeah, I guess overall is I'm glad we're putting together or proposing to do an ordinance because you know, having gone through this very cumbersome process, we're like, we don't even want to spend any more time with that. And no, there's actually a lot of, we got to get good at this, because I think there's some other properties we do want to potentially sell. And so thank you for taking the bull by the horns and improving that. And also considering that the highest value for the property may not be the highest bid. And so that's also good. I'll have more specifics later.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you,
And
Councilmember.
just one thing on that too. Another thing I should have mentioned maybe at the beginning is one of the reasons why we do want this in city code is to make it more accessible, easier to find. We've discovered, well, and as you've all seen with the art policy recently, sometimes these resolutions are sort of buried, and there are things that exist that we don't always know about and just happen upon them. And I think Debbie has encountered that a couple times, has found things that are old resolutions that we should be following or that maybe aren't so clear. And so this will provide it in a better form. It will exist. Everybody can find it. It's in city code. So that's also an important thing to consider.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilor Bernice, Councilor Joy?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, and we knew this was coming, I think, and that there was going to be some changes, and I was really considering this going to be a minor change, or kind of updating some of the way we proceed as the council to market and advertise. But this is major changes to where now we're talking about delegating or giving our authority to our city administrator to do instead of us. And I think cutting the public out of it, a lot of the cases in that disposing of real property. And so I don't believe we're going to have time to go over this in weeks of all the different changes that I see here. And so I would recommend maybe one of two things. Whether, you know, all the delegation stuff we just eliminate now initially to talk about just the sale process and to where we can get sales processing, marketing, and things like that done sooner. And then defer some of the, if we need to be, the delegation to a policy committee, which we've been talked about having to have, but some type of other committee to look at this a little bit more thoroughly, or just keep this on a work session and just rehash sections of it at a time over and over again until we finalize what the delegation is. That's my concern is. There's a lot of changes here and here that I was not expecting.
Okay. I don't know we'll be able to resolve that until we get into the depth of it and decide for certain, but thank you for that heads up. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I don't write ordinances, not even on TV. So I just want to disclose it up front. So if this turns out to be a really stupid statement, but when we're writing our recitals in an ordinance, should there be a whereas that explains more broadly the public interest in actually doing this ordinance? It talks about, the whereases are very specific about the way that the ordinance is going to clear up different maybe areas of conflict or unclear areas, but it never discusses why the people of Billings should care whether we have this ordinance. Do you understand? I mean, is that clear that if there isn't a whereas, like, whereas the city of Billings would like to best utilize or more efficiently manage its own property, or does it say that already? That's my question.
Thank you for that question. I don't think it has exactly what it is that you're describing, but absolutely can certainly add some additional language, and I would welcome any specific language that you might have. Whereas clauses, the recitals really aren't. They're not required. You don't really even have to have a whereas clause, but I wanted to include some that provided the authority for the different things that were included in here. And often, yes, it has recitals that describe those kind of purposes and intent of the ordinance. So absolutely, something can be added there, whatever council would like to see.
Well, that's a very good segue to page 1 of the ordinance, I would say, and the list of recitals. Does anybody from council have an objection to charging Gina with doing her best to come up with another recital that talks about some broad brush policy goals to be achieved here, like maximizing return for resources, maximizing public input in disposition of property, or something along those lines? That sounds fairly harmless and not a bad idea. Any problem with that? Okay. Councilmember Tricky?
I think sitting there and putting it into the ordinance exactly what our goals for the acquisition or getting rid of property seems to be a little too restrictive. We may be doing it there's a lot of different reasons that we might be doing it, and maximizing return on investment is not necessarily the most important one that we should even be looking at right now. So it doesn't make sense to me. That's specific.
Okay. There's no right or wrong here. Again, the recitals are not enforceable per se, but they have some value. I would recommend that if it were granted, it be broad enough to incorporate the situation that Councilmember Tricky is talking about, that you derive value not just from dollars, potentially. That might help to alleviate some of that concern. I'm going to assume we have no other concerns about the recitals and move on unless somebody waves their hand. Okay? So let's move on then to the first section, 22901, state law superseded. Any comments about that section off the top of your head? Gina, you'll see some things from me that are, I would, in the hard copy that I gave you, I would call just your discretion or grammatical or whatever that don't justify public discussion, I don't think. But they are in there for your benefit. Okay, then we'll move on to section 902, authorization of sale. And comments, Councilmember Neese, Councilmember Gulick.
Mayor, I'm sorry, I had my hand up for 901.
Oh, okay, back to 901.
So Gina added a sentence there about all other provisions. So Gina, do I understand that correctly that this process is not covered or not excluded from us as self-governing cities? It's not one of those listed things that we can't do. So are you saying here that we're actually overriding the state's, any kind of state policy on it?
That's correct, overriding any state statute that conflicts with the provisions in the ordinance.
Okay, and maybe I'm misunderstood this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I understood that if the state addressed an issue, then the city is required to follow that?
No, that's actually not accurate. In fact, there is at least one attorney general opinion on this specific issue, indicating that it's the statute that provides for the disposal of city property, and in the state statute, it is required that property that is held in trust for a specific purpose, I'm trying to find the specific language, a sale or lease must be approved by a majority vote of the electors, actually. So state statute is pretty restrictive in that respect, and an AG opinion has been issued which holds the effect of law in absence of a court or a statute otherwise, that municipalities can in fact supersede and create their own provisions if they're a self-governing municipality. Another provision in the state statute is that 2/3 of council or city commission must approve this type of sale or disposal of property belonging to a city, And that was also addressed in that AG opinion. So it's not correct to say that just because there's a state statute that you have to follow it, cities with self-governing powers can supersede certain sections of the law.
Okay, Mayor, quick follow-up on that?
Go ahead.
So Gina, as we get to each section, I'm assuming that any of the delegation sections are not in accordance with state law, so we're superseding state law on those. And then when we indicate that we're doing 6 council members, which could be 50% or more, depending on how many is in attendance, that also is not following state law, so we're superseding state law on those, at least those 2 issues.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to section 902. I'll start us with a comment about the first subsection A. Council, here I'll be referring to the hard copy that I handed out with my own chicken scratches on here, in case you care to follow along on that. It's page 3, the top of page 3, subsection A, the very first one. And in the second sentence, it says the city administrator may negotiate and enter into agreements to sell, exchange, or donate real property subject to ratification by the city council and compliance with this article. I would recommend that we delete the 3 words "and enter into." The reason being that the fundamental question in any contract dispute is, do you have a contract? And when did you create that contract? And it makes me nervous to say that the city administrator may enter into a contract when the whole point of this is that, as I understand it, to have the city administrator go out and negotiate a contract and then bring it back to us to actually enter into the contract. Otherwise, we may have a situation where somebody looks at this and says, hey, well, the city administrator signed it, so our discretion was somehow limited, as opposed to absolute. And get into a question about whether Chris's signature created some sort of contract. And my understanding is that's not the goal here, to have a little contract that becomes then a bigger contract. You either got one, or you're either pregnant or you're not. And that's the whole thing we're trying to make sure we know when we're pregnant. So that's the reason for deleting those 3 words. Gina, do you want to comment, or is that okay by you, or should we move on?
That is certainly fine, Mayor. The intent of that sentence was to allow council, if you read further on, it says subject to ratification by the city council. Perhaps ratification wasn't the best word. The intent was to allow the city administrator to enter into agreements with the consent of council. So after council has authorized him, then the city administrator could actually execute the agreements instead of requiring the mayor's signature. But that's, I have no objection or any issue with that
Okay.
amendment.
All right, thank you. Anything else on A before we go on to B? I have something at the end of B. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't object to your change on that, but I do have 2 questions on A. One is, I didn't like the word ratification, because I think city council should have the authority at that time to either approve, condition, modify, or reject any negotiation that came before the council. And so I would like to see that change. I think that was what was in the original ordinance. I'd like to see that ratification change to those things. And then
I apologize. Ratification would be changed to something else?
to approval, condition, modify, or reject.
Gene, any problem with that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm following what the specific
So
language is that's
Councilmember
being
Neese
requested.
is recommending deleting the word ratification and replacing it with the word Councilman
Words
Neese?
of approval, condition, modification, or rejection.
Okay, approval, what was the second word?
Condition,
Okay,
modification, or rejection.
the concept being, I guess, that it is approval. Approval condition. Okay, I guess I don't have any personal problem with that.
And Mayor, the second item, question I had is whether, as far as the city administrator may negotiate, and Chris, this is really more of a question to you. Do you delegate that often, or should it be something city administrator and his delegee or something like that? Because I know Kevin has been involved in a lot of this negotiation. So is that something that needs to indicate that other than you can do the negotiation?
You're right, Councilmember Neese, that does happen. What I don't know is looking to Gina as to whether it needs to be clarified here that that can happen or not. But there are negotiations that take place that ultimately, in the end, if I have the authority, as up to that signing authority to approve something, it may be the negotiations, or that may take place, and then I'm ultimately the one who needs to sign it. In this case, I'd ask Gina, per your question,
Right.
Does it mean they're precluded from having Kevin or a department head, would be the two obvious examples, be negotiating something.
Right, yeah. If we could hear from that, that'd be helpful.
Okay, before, something else on this section before A?
To hear from Gina.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I don't think, I think maybe perhaps what you're suggesting is to add the city, after the words city administrator or his or her
Yeah.
designee. I don't think it's necessary, but we certainly can include that. I'm trying to locate a general provision in our code that I think clarifies that already as to the entirety of the code. I'm just not be able to put my finger on it right now. But
Yeah, I personally would think that anytime you say the city administrator, that assumes that person can designate a designee. The concern of is if we mention a designee here and we don't someplace else, we're sort of sending a message that they're different situations, and I don't think we'd want to send that message.
Right, and again, I'm not sure, that's why I'm bringing up the question whether or not it would matter or not. So if it doesn't, if the conversation is that city administrator also means whether it's allowed in somewhere else in the code to say yes as designee, and ultimately it's the city administrator that does, really answers to us on the negotiation.
Mayor, if I may, sorry, I actually did just locate it. It is in a general provision at the beginning of the code that references, it indicates such references to like a particular employee shall include any designee acting for such officer, employee, department, board, or other agency. So that is already included in our code. Where is it? That is in section 1-102. It's a definitions and rules of construction. It's in the general provisions.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on A before we move to B? Councilmember Owen?
Thank you. Gina, I was looking actually for something else on the city website and came across some resolutions historically where there appear to be some sales or transfers or disposition of property. And there is a resolution specifically granting the city administrator authority to negotiate a contract within a certain scope. Those resolutions and the way the language was previously drafted seem to suggest, in my reading at least, that the process of disposition of land begins with council. I'm concerned that the way this has been written, it seems to end at council. And so I'm wondering if those sorts of resolutions to specifically grant authority, really making sure council knows at the outset when contract negotiations are underway would still be within the scope of what happens here, or if council could really, under this language, be kind of in the dark until a contract is presented already fully negotiated. Because from the business community perspective, that's a nightmare scenario to sit down and negotiate and then go to council that's blind and have them begin tearing it apart. So how do we address that, just generically?
Sure. Councilmember Owen, I think that is addressed in section 22-903. It's, when you look at our current section 22-902, it tries to clarify this process, or it tries to provide for this process, which I don't think is very clear. So in this proposal before you, in section 22-903, it requires that this has to come to council first, and council has to, prior to any sale, exchange, or donation, council must make a finding that the property is no longer necessary to conduct city business, or that the public interest may be furthered by the sale, exchange, or donation, and then the council must pass a resolution of intent. And then city staff would be engaging in the process that you're talking about, negotiating and either putting it out for bid or public auction or negotiating a contract.
So just to follow up, Mayor, when you drafted 903, did you intend that to be very property specific? Because I'm thinking, for example, of the long list of parks properties that are identified for disposition. That was sort of a generic, we think all of these could be disposed of, but specific negotiations could be underway without council knowing about it. And then I think that raises concerns if scope questions haven't been addressed at the outset of the specific property negotiation of council then coming in at the 11th hour. So was your intent in drafting 903 to be every single specific parcel would need a resolution, even if, for example, a prior policy of let's dispose of parkland had been passed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
That's helpful.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Still on A?
We still
Okay.
on A because Councilwoman Owen brought up a good point about that, because I think it does, to me, it kind of puts the cart before the horse, and maybe we should actually put 903 as 901, because then it would actually indicate that before we even start this process, this is what has to happen. It has to be looked at council and then determined that it has to be surplus, basically property to be put out. And because that's the first thing someone's going to read in the ordinance. And in fact, I would actually even say that prior to not just the sale or exchange, but prior to the negotiation, sale or exchange. So that way it indicates that, yeah, we're not even going to negotiate city property until council has looked at it and said, yeah, this is property that we want to put up for sale.
Okay. Gina, you heard that comment, trying to go chronologically, kind of in logical order. Do you have any, maybe you want to take a look at that? It may be too early for you to commit one way or another, but that does make a certain amount of sense, of course.
Mayor and council, I agree that it's always easier to read some of these things if you can do it in a chronological fashion. Unfortunately, there's a lot of state laws and even in our city code that you have to cross-reference sections. I put this together in a way that I think makes sense, but if council wants to rearrange this, I mean, come up with different headings, I'm certainly open to that. I don't think it's necessary, frankly. I mean, I think that this sets forth what the requirements are. If you look at 22-902, right above it, subsection G, and that indicates any sale, donation, or exchange of real property must comply with the provisions of this article. So that means you have to read the entire article to know what provisions are going to apply to a sale or to a purchase or, you know, to anything that would apply to this real property under this article. So, I mean, frankly, I don't think it's necessary, but I'm happy to rearrange this however council would like to see it. So whatever the majority of you would like me to do, I'm happy to do it.
Okay. I guess my feeling is it's still Gina's document until it comes back to us. I don't know. I think we'll be here all night if we have to have a vote on everything. But your point's been made, Councilmember Neese. Gina, maybe you can think about that. Perhaps even in 902, you make some reference subject to the requirements of, 903, that the reader would naturally go back. But it's a drafting issue. Unless other council wants some sort of more definitive determination, I say we move on. Is that okay, Councilor Bernice?
Yeah, that's fine with me. I think I made my point, and it's a simple change. And again, this is a work session, so we may be here all night working on this ordinance that we just got here tonight.
Sure, yeah. Okay, Councilmember Purinton, before we go to B.
Well, I was just going to say, given the title of 901, where it's stating that state law is superseded, it really doesn't apply to, what 902 is about at that point.
I'm sorry, I said 901, but I meant 902. Just flip-flop,
Oh,
901,
gotcha.
902 and
Okay.
903.
All right, thank you.
Sorry about that. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to subsection B on my page 3 in 902. And my comment here is a fairly simple one. There are 3 places where the 2018 resolution establishing the city administrator signing authority is mentioned. And it's mentioned specifically that particular resolution, meaning that if we were to change that resolution, we would have to go back and change this statute in 3 places. And if we missed one or forgot to do it, we'd have an inconsistency. So what I was suggesting is that, Gina, think about adding some language at the end of that that says, or any similar but superseding resolution establishing such signing authority. So that if we change the 2018 resolution, we wouldn't have to go back and amend this this ordinance. Gina or council, any problems with that concept?
Mayor, no, I can clarify, I can provide some additional language as either
Okay.
suggested by you or maybe just remove the reference to the specific resolution. But yes, I'll make some amendment there to accomplish that goal.
Okay, very good. Then any other changes to B? Councilmember Neese.
So Mayor, and maybe I'm not sure about this, but I'm going to state it. And so Gina, you can correct me, or Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. But this is, I believe, this is a new area where we're now allowing the city administrator, up to his assigning authority, to dispose of real property. Now, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that can be done for, excess trucks or cars or any of our, equipment in the city. And so I'm concerned if this is a major, I think this is a major change in our policy shift, where we're going to delegate the city administrator to dispose of city property through a process that may not, as I understand, as I read through this more, will not involve the public at all, and or the city council. Am I correct? And this is kind of summarizing how real property can be now disposed of, even more so than equipment property of the city?
Mayor, Councilmember Neese, I think, maybe I wasn't very clear, but the public is involved pretty significantly, I guess I would say, for any sale, exchange, or donation of city real property. First of all, there must be a public meeting that would be noticed up, and then city council would have to make the finding that the property is no longer necessary. Then council would pass a resolution of intent that it intends to sell or exchange or donate property. And then a public hearing would need to be held, and before that public hearing could be held, notice would be provided as required by state statute, which means you'd have to publish, you publish notice twice in a newspaper set forth in the statute, and then you would take public hearing or public comment again. The first meeting wouldn't be a public hearing, but it would be a public meeting, so of course public comment could be accepted.
So Gina, I apologize for interrupting, but what you're saying is section 22-903 limits the authority of the city administrator. If that's the case, is there any reason we shouldn't refer to 903 in this section? subject to the requirements of section 903 and any other sections, comma, the city administrator may approve, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm sorry, I'm not following. In what section do you want to reference 22-903? I perhaps didn't hear
In
Councilmember
what
Neese's
Councilmember Neese was
first
talking
comment.
about in subsection B of 902 that gives the city administrator the power to approve and take necessary action to finalize sale. If I understand what you're saying is the city administrator only has that authority if these other council-related steps and notice-related steps have taken place first.
Oh, yes, I'm absolutely. As stated in 22-902 sub G, any sale, donation, or exchange of real property must comply with all the provisions of the article. Of this.
So I understand that if 903 is required, then the council would meet on, say, a small park property and say they want to dispose of it, say we want to dispose of it. The market value based upon a comp from a realtor may say it's $50,000. So the city administrator can list it, or it doesn't say they have to. The city administrator, and I'm not saying Chris, I'm saying the city administrator could know someone who wants this property, sell it to them, and never report it to council. There's no requirement that I see here that ever has to come back to council. They can exchange it, they can sell it, they can exchange it, they can donate it to some organization without it ever coming back to the council on any consent agenda for approval or anything like that. And that's, I see this process circumventing the council all the way up to the $80,000 limit.
Councilmember Neese, that's actually not what this says, but I understand that interpretation. I mean, if you want to look at subsection A, that provides, I mean, that says essentially the same thing. City council has the authority to sell, exchange, or donate any real property. It doesn't reference the other sections, but you have to read it as a whole. 22-902 subsection G references any sale must comply with the provisions of this article, and the rest of the provisions of the article set forth the process and the requirements and the appraisal and those, all those things that require the resolution to be passed, the public hearing to be held, the notice to be provided. You can certainly cross-reference within subsection B if you think that's appropriate. Again, it's not necessary because it's already in there under subsection G, but we can certainly add cross-references if you like. That's not the intention, and that's not what this says. I don't believe that that's what this says.
And, well, you mentioned appraisals, but I believe there's sections in there allows waiver of appraisals, or appraisals are not required. So there's a lot there within the discretion of the individual who happens to be a city administrator to either say, no, we're not going to do an appraisal, we're not going to do that. And then there is no, once it goes to the city administrator, there is no other public process. It doesn't ever come back to the council on a consent agenda to say that this property has been disposed of. I didn't read anything in here that talked about that. It seems to me once it turns over to the city administrator, he handles it and this council never sees it again. That's part of the delegation, is we don't have to deal with it again. But then the public doesn't also ever see what happened to that.
So I'm not sure where we're at exactly, except that there is agreement that the notice requirements are intended to apply to all sales. Councilmember Neese, you're looking quizzically. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from Gina.
Right.
So we just want to make sure that that is clear in the language, and you agree with that, correct?
Yeah, notices would apply to all sales, and the notices, and yeah, we're going to, that I agree with, that they would notice that the property is for sale. But the acceptance of the sale after the notice, what happens after the notice?
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Gina, is that pursuant to B, the city administrator could close that sale, sign off on all the documents, as long as the amount in question was within a signing authority. Is that correct, Gina? So
And
there's no final city approval for the consummation of a sale below $80,000?
Yes, that's correct. The council would need to approve that would have to make the finding that the property could be sold in the first place. It would have to then do that, go through that process. And then the city administrator could approve, take whatever action necessary to finalize a sale if it is that smaller amount, under the $80,000 threshold.
So the council would have to start the process, but the council would not have to finish that process.
So the property could be given away by a city administrator. After notice.
Once the city council had made the determination under 903 that it's no longer necessary to conduct city business, that
Right.
property.
Right, and then, so there's no accountability to what happens to that property.
On the details you're talking
Right,
about.
yeah. This is where I think that this whole concept of delegation to city administrator, while it may have some merit, I think this is going to be at least a sticking point to mine until we can close some of those loopholes.
Okay, further discussion on B. Councilmember Owen.
Gina, this may be, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead, I didn't want to interrupt your question.
Sorry. This may be a technicality that's immaterial, but we're referencing here multiple times a signing authority. But that signing authority in both state law and in the resolution has nothing to do with the disposition of property. We're agreed on that, right?
Yes,
So this
absolutely.
is expanding a city administrator's authority beyond the signing privilege granted in state law for procurement, which is very clearly laid out, into something that is brand new.
That's correct, and if council is not comfortable with that delegation of authority, I just need that direction. I'm happy to take those out, those sections out of here.
Are there
Yeah.
references here just to grab the monetary value? Is that the reason we're referencing all of this?
absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
But it's clear that we're expanding authority.
Yes,
Got it.
that statutory reference is, you're right, is a completely different area of the law. We're just using that as the amount that council has previously authorized the city administrator to sign contracts for purchasing,
Goods and services.
Yes, yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilor Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Gina, Chris, could you just explain to us why this was felt they would be beneficial? I guess maybe if we could just understand some of the motivation behind why this expansion of authority might be useful to us. Maybe we could decide if we want to go there or not.
So I'll take the first, stab at it. When we first looked at, your initiative to look at parkland, the hours and hours that staff puts into these and state law gives the city administrative authority to buy. So then the conclusion was, well, should it be there to sell too? Once council says, yes, we want to dispose of this, we're using the market analysis or appraisals, or the best use of that property. So shouldn't the city administrator have that same type of authority on the sell side as the buy side?
Go ahead.
Thank you. The city administrator can sell other types of property without council approval, or up to a certain limit? Or is there if Chris wanted to sell every seat, every chair at City Hall, and it would come in at $85,000, could he do that?
That, I guess, would be a legal question on disposal of other city property.
Councilmember Rupsis, I do not believe our city code has anything to reference that kind of property, personal property, but I'm checking. I will look here.
I'm trying to think, Councilmember Rupsis, along that line, vehicles would probably be the most valuable thing that we sell. You might be astonished at how little they get once we sell them, but I'm thinking a vehicle would be one of the more valuable assets that we do dispose of annually.
But don't we see those on a consent agenda? Would those generally come through us?
Those usually come, yeah, like I can picture the police department things and the fleet vehicles.
Do they
Those are
approve them
approved.
at the front end? Okay. 'Cause I mean, ultimately, you see everything we buy, even though the signing authority is there for myself or other staff, it still comes through the process, but,
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Boyd. Then we'll try to continue through. We're not going to resolve every issue, but this is actually a very good discussion.
So who has the
identifying
signing
policy
authority
issues.
now, or isn't it the mayor? Isn't he the one that usually signs everything now? Question?
I sign a lot of contracts,
we both,
Yes,
yeah,
basically, yes.
yeah.
but they're council-approved contracts. Yeah. Council, I would suggest we just keep moving through. We've got a product in front of us. We're identifying good policy issues. We're going to have to come back and resolve some of these, of course, but try to stay within our structure as best we can. Anything else on, call it C or D? The E is a big one, so I'm going to deal with E separately, but anything else on C or D? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I have a concern about the comment in C where it says, or a public benefit is determined by a majority of council members. I'd like to see that defined a little bit more. I don't think there's a definition section in here. But is that something, again, I don't think our ordinances do a good job of defining things.
Yeah, I appreciate your desire for perfect specificity, but I think that one might be a road too far, just because I don't know how we would. I think part of the purpose here is to be purposefully broad. That would be my guess. We could give some examples, but I don't know that we'd ever come up with a definition that was truly all-inclusive of public benefit.
Okay.
At least I'm not smart enough to do that.
Okay, and Gina, just for my recollection, was that comment as far as or a public benefit included in the prior ordinance? Or is this something new that we're adding?
No, there wasn't anything included in the prior city code section with regard to exchanges.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you, Mayor. I just, and again, I'd be in opposition to that comment there, so we can move on to the next one.
And Councilmember Neese, the mayor is correct in that it was specifically, or it was intentionally not defined, the term public benefit, in order to give council the discretion to make those determinations when a particular deal or a particular piece of property and situation presented itself.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll move then to E. In E,
I'm sorry, Mayor, D.
Yeah.
D is next. D is in David?
yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So, again, Gina, was the reduced rate to another government entity in the prior ordinance?
It was not included in the prior ordinance. That's just a statutory, that's provided in state statute, so I just included it.
Oh, I see. So that's
Since-
something you pulled out of state statute that we could do. Okay, all right. I wouldn't, again, I'm concerned about why we would do that for another government entity. Do you have any idea why that's a good idea?
I'm sorry, why what?
Why we would reduce the sale price for another government entity?
Well, if you determined that you wanted to donate something to the county so that they could use it for their governmental purposes, the state statute actually allows a city, after passing a resolution of intent, to sell or trade to any county or political subdivision any property, however held or acquired, that's not necessary for the conduct of the city business without an ordinance, without public notice, without no public auction bids or appraisals. I did not include that broad of authority in the ordinance, but that's statutorily allowed.
And that includes what, quasi-governmental agencies as well?
And that includes what? I didn't hear you.
Quasi-governmental agencies, like the TIF district or something like those?
No, it specifically references any county or political subdivision, not a quasi-political subdivision. So if it's defined as a political subdivision, and I would have to look up each one that you're referencing, because I don't know that those are considered political subdivisions without cross-referencing the statutes.
So the state defines the government entity, but our ordinance doesn't. We're not referring back to the state statute that defines that. So we make sure it doesn't come up later on.
No, there is no definition section in the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll move to E and E1. So this is the section that talks about what happens if the city wants to donate or give somebody a good deal, sell at a reduced rate. And it gives certain examples of that situation. The first situation is where you're dealing with a historically significant building or monument. I guess my suggestion would be broader than that and say historically significant building, monument, or feature to an entity. Because there could be a situation where there's a piece of land that's historically significant, but it doesn't have a building on it. It doesn't have a monument on it, but it is inherently historical, and hence the word adding feature. And I would assume that that's more consistent with our intent in this situation, not limit ourselves just to dealing with buildings and monuments. Any problem with that, Gina, conceptually? Okay. Any other comments by council on the historic situation? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that when we are looking at donate or reduce rates to something like this with historical significance or feature, that the idea is that that entity is going to take over that property, is going to do something with it. And I would like to make sure that there's a requirement there that maybe they're required to be bonded, so that if they don't do that, or if they get halfway through it and whatever they're doing, they don't just leave a mess, that we can step in with the bond and take back the property and finish off whatever they were attempting to do. And so my concern would be if there needs to be some type of requirement to make sure whatever the reason why we're doing this, that it gets finished.
Councilmember Neese, let me ask you this question, then I'd suggest, Councilor, we take a break. I was having so much fun, I lost track of the time here. But in subparagraph B, it does talk about providing for the reversion of the property, including any improvements made to the property of the city for non-compliant with conditions attached to the transfer. So there might be lots of different types of conditions. I don't know that we'd want to get so specific as to say everything has to have a bond, but that could be one of those conditions.
Okay, so you're saying a bond would be, could be a condition that we can put in there? Okay.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
And that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, any objection taking Councilmember Ripsis?
I'm thoroughly enjoying all the legal discussion here. It seems you're an attorney, Councilmember Neese apparently is an attorney as well. Since that's 2/3 of the ops committee, I wonder if maybe instead of going through every line item on the rest of this for the next 2 hours, if we could maybe refer this to the ops committee, please.
Let's all right, do you want to address that issue now before we take a break, council?
But I do think it's a good idea.
This is the last thing on the agenda, so we could potentially wrap up without having a break, if council is amenable to kicking it off.
Council, we can address that. There may be some fundamental policy issues, though, that the council does want to weigh in. They're not just technical drafting things. Councilmember Shaw, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. I want to clarify. When I said this is a waste of time, I think going through this line by line, the way we've been doing it, is a waste of time for this for the entire body. We have two people, and Councilmember Owen, which I appreciate, who are engaging in this discussion, and the rest of us are, I would like to get to the high-level things if people have issues, the top policy stuff. I don't want to spend 3 more hours on this, though, honestly. And so I was trying to think of a really nice way to say it, and I appreciate Councilmember Ripsis bringing it up, but I would definitely recommend that we send this to the Ops Committee if this is the work that actually people want to do.
Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I am going to wait patiently, no matter what happens, because I do have some points to make. It doesn't happen to be on this page, but if it takes 2.5 hours to get to page 4, I'm here for the duration. I get paid by the minute, apparently. So I'm here for the duration, but there are things that I would like to discuss that are at the policy level and not the particular language. So whatever council decides, I'm here for the duration. I got my sleeping bag.
Well, let's hope you don't need the sleeping bag. But council, let's take a break because we are going to have some discussion. It sounds like about some higher level policy. We'll take a 7:45. Let's come back about 5 minutes and try to wrap this up sooner rather than later. We don't want to spend get to sleeping bags.
Policy issues.
Yeah, and we'll try to focus on 30,000-foot issues as much as we can. Okay, welcome back, everyone. When we broke off, I think there was a consensus that the goal should be to try to identify higher-level policy issues for discussion. We didn't have a vote, but my sense was that there was a majority who would like to see this go to the Operations Committee. We'll want to clarify that and make sure that's the case before we leave tonight. But basic policy issues. One of them, I think, is where we left off on page 4 of the red line. There's this issue of when the city can give away property or give below rate pricing on a property. And there's 3 or 4 specific situations there. One, the historically significant property. 2, the economic development purposes. 3, constructing buildings for emergency transitional shelter housing. And 4, for sustainability purposes. What is not included in there is a catch-all of other public benefit that wouldn't fall within those 4. I think that's a policy issue. I guess I would propose that we include language that does reference other public benefit. It could be part of paragraph 2 dealing with economic development or other public benefit. Councilmember Neese had voiced some concern about something that broad. So what does council think? Are these 4 examples for giving away property or pricing below market sufficient, or do we want something broader? Councilmember Roupsis, Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm fine with, incorporating that into number 2, economic development or other public benefits. The one that I kind of question, though, is could we define what sustainability purposes are? I wasn't quite getting that.
Okay, so maybe, Jean, you want to comment on that? Then we'll recognize Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor. I think actually, it's my opinion that the terms economic development and sustainability purposes are already broad. And again, that was intentional so that council can make that determination when something is presented to it to determine if something meets the purpose of economic development from council's perspective, in considering council's goals. Same thing for sustainability purposes. I think when you start to define that, you're going to perhaps unintentionally restrict yourself in the future, but that's just my opinion. So we can go there and provide some sort of definition. I'm happy to do that.
Councilmember Roupsis?
Becky, could you just give me one example of what a sustainability purpose or goal would be so I could understand what you're thinking with the concept there?
Well, I think that could be something involving like energy or even Kevin's going to say
Yeah,
on this one.
I'll jump in here and help because Gina and I talked about this a little bit. Say cardboard recycling plant came to town and said, we want to start doing that, but we need a 3-acre piece of ground. Would council consider something like that? Or the Energy and Conservation Commission, they move forward an idea of something, a business coming in that would meet those goals.
Other one that comes to mind, Northwestern Energy once had a deal with them where they put solar arrays on a piece of city property. And the city gave that, there was an agreement between them, and it was not a market deal for their usage of that land for that purpose.
So maybe adding the word environmental in front of sustainability would be, add some clarity to that. Councilmember Gulick?
That was going to be my question as well. And so I'm satisfied now with the discussion.
Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I thought maybe I missed the meeting where we established sustainability goals because I don't want to miss that one. So in future, let's expect to set some sustainability goals. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to speak in probably opposite of what you heard me say before, but I think the idea here is we're talking about, where we're selling property at reduced rate and why. Like you said, there's lots of different reasons. Now we tried to identify 4 of them. And in this ordinance, I guess we'll have to change it in 5 or 10 years because I just don't think we should be that specific. I would cut out number 3 and number 4 and put in the other phrase, or the council's discretion to that, because we'd already said that before, that basically it's council's discretion is what they're going to do earlier, at what was it section, a public benefit. So it's already, I don't know why we're listing them all out there. If all of these are public benefit, then why are we going through the process of just trying to define them? If we're not going to define them before, or why don't we just say this is what public benefit is?
Okay.
As Mayor, if I may, just by way of background, some of this was included because it's statutory, and so for example, the historically significant issue, that's statutory, and so I've included that, as well as the affordable housing, that's statutory. And although the language included in the ordinance is slightly broader than the language that's contained in the statute with regard to the affordable housing issue, and the other ones were included to obviously just simply give council more options, more tools, the economic development, the sustainability, so that's where those come from.
Okay. I guess one issue or one benefit of being specific might be that it encourages those organizations to come forward because it's in your statute, and then they may ask, because there may be some benefit to that. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I mean, I kind of wanted to raise the issue about affordable housing and sheltering. I think, I don't know that there's language that should be put in here, but very often if you're using federal funds or you're using HUD money, you get if the funding source is HUD money, you get into some very difficult issues if that property is no longer used for affordable housing. And I'm referring to the housing that was sold by Homefront recently that was sold to corporations. That was HUD money. And the stipulation was all of the affordable housing that was sold had to be sold as a package. And so a constituent contacted me and said, I'd like to bid on a house. Well, he wasn't a corporation that could buy the entire project. So I think that there may be, it's not a thing that we can maybe put in here, but the source of the funding when it comes to federal dollars can make this very difficult to do. You will not be able to revert it back to the city in a lot of ways. So I don't think that necessarily means we need to change the language, but I think it's something that we should be aware of. Depending on the funding source for housing, you may get stuck approving a project, but ending up losing the affordability and the land itself. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Puritan?
So I guess that's my question too, Gina, as I looked at this, is that all of section 3, how do you revert that back after it's been used for housing? I mean, it'd have to be, kind of like what I guess the county did out there, and they had constructed the little hospital at Metro Park. I mean, I don't understand how this can be reverted back to city property.
It just depends on the terms and conditions that you include. There can be deed restrictions that require reversion of property. It's just a legal process that would have to be gone through.
But why would we want it back?
Oh, well, if you would want it back, you'd put those conditions in, but if council didn't want it back, then you wouldn't have to do that. You wouldn't have to include all those conditions. It's just that oftentimes, I guess the thought is that you would be selling it at a reduced price so that they would use it for that purpose. So it would seem that that council would want it used for that purpose. And if not, then it would revert back to the city, and that would provide the incentive for it to continue to be used for that purpose intended.
Okay, again, with the goal of trying to stay at 30,000 feet for policy issues that everybody should weigh in on. What other, we'll have to go back to the issue of city administrator authority at some point, but are there other, those sort of policy issues? Councilmember Neese.
Mayor, for time, I think I see Debbie out there. She's here to talk to us about 22908. If we can address that and any policy issues that may be up, that way we can get her out the door since she's the only.
That would be great.
There.
Good suggestion. Debbie, the city administrator, 908 does involve city administrator authorization. What's the thinking?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have many, many easements that come to you, and oftentimes they're like 2 feet on a corner to put in a signal pole, or, just a corner to put in an ADA ramp, or a piece of sidewalk, or something like that. Very minimal, and we still have all the staff time to bring it to council and put together all the agreements, when it would really make it more streamlined, faster to get the projects going and everything if we could just do some of those administratively. They're usually very, very small.
Councilor Neese?
Debbie, what's the largest dollar amount of easement that we've ever had to approve that this would fall under?
The largest easements we've done since I've been here for the Inner Belt Loop, and we spent a total of $80,000 for the entire corridor. So most of those were on the order of $4,000 to $8,000 a piece for that whole stretch. So that's the biggest I can remember in the last 20 years.
Okay, and do they always, Mayor, if you don't mind, do they always include public infrastructure in those easements?
If we do easements or right-of-way, yes, that's what they're for. If I'm bringing them forward, normally parks would be the same thing. Yeah.
Okay,
I
thank
can't
you.
think of any reason we would do that without that.
Councilor Rowan?
Debbie, I don't mean this question flippantly at all, but help me understand what is the massive burden of coming and talking to city council?
Two things. One, it kind of goes back to your conversation a few weeks ago when we were talking about the length of council meetings. When I have 10 easements on here, it's just more for you to read, it's more for you to do, it's more for you to address, and it's more for us to write and put together and bring to council and that kind of thing too. So when you look at the sheer number of them that we have, we're just looking for ways to streamline it that really don't have a huge impact. We don't think this is a huge impact to ask the city administrator signing authority on these.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
So which of the documents that you prepare for us would you not prepare for the city administrator for approval?
Basically, the council memos and if we have anything associated with those, but the standard agreement would still be what Chris would sign.
And the council memos are a couple of paragraphs, right? Or is there some sort of lengthy process to develop a council memo I don't understand?
Every council memo that goes through my office sees 6 different people.
Okay.
Actually more than 6 by the time it gets to the city administrator's office in legal. So you're seeing 6, 7, 8 people on every memo.
But that's your choice, right? Not ours? We didn't, or did council direct you to do that?
That is the process that we use to have it go through the people that generate it, their supervisor, their division manager, to make sure that we don't have errors when it comes to you. So we make sure that it sees all the necessary people. And then, yeah, just again, in the interest of trying to keep council business to the things that council cares about, what we think that council is very concerned about. I've never seen one pulled off at consent, and so that's why we talked about doing it this way.
I guess I would just share, Mayor, as we consider sort of policy issues, this land doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the public. And so not every process has to be as streamlined as possible. Some should, and it's great to talk about them and debate them and raise them up and say, could we do better? But at the end of the day, this property belongs to the public. And if we never, ever put ADA accessibility in the limelight or access to lands in limelight, then I'm not sure that we're doing the public's business. This isn't about what council wants. It's about the fact that this is public property. And, I'm concerned with a blanket check that or a blanket sort of statement that any easement, right-of-way, isn't worth the public's time, because I think there's a public interest there. So I'm not being critical of raising the issue up, because I think it's really important that you do that so that we can discuss it. But I think my concern would be that it's overbroad. And I think that's going to be generally the theme that we have to wrestle with, is how much authority in the name of efficiency do we put behind the curtain, and how much authority do we maintain here where the public can hear about it and discuss it, or come and give comment if they chose to. So those are just my thoughts. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. I'll just comment on that. I think it's worth pointing out that the language is may, so this would authorize the city administrator to do it, but the city administrator, in his or her discretion, I suppose, could always kick it back if there was an issue, or the city council could direct the city administrator to bring a particular issue if there was something in our neighborhood that became an issue, but it wouldn't necessarily prohibit council from playing some role on an ad hoc basis anyway. Councilmember Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if there's a difference. A talks about easements, and so that's private property that's granting an easement to the city so that we can use it. B talks about granting rights of way, so that's city property that we're allowing other people to use. So to me, they seem almost opposite, right? Councilmember Owen's concern that she just expressed was more, I think, directed to B, right, using the public lands for something else. And to me, that kind of reminds me of the conversation we had a little while ago about the parkland along 36th Street West that we wanted to put the utilities through. And I thought that was a pretty good conversation. It seems like something that we should have had in this body, just to talk that through, and at least to raise the issue that, hey, we'd like to have more of these utilities buried instead of going through the neighborhoods like that. But I wonder, is there a differentiation? If you had to pick one, is A seems to be, I haven't heard any concerns about A, but B maybe seems like where the issues might be.
Debbie?
In the time I've been here, I can only think of us granting a right-of-way or an easement to another company maybe less than 3 times. For the majority, the right-of-way is intended for the public use, including utilities. We don't grant easements or right-of-way to them. We give them permits. They already have the statutory right to be in that right-of-way. So the only time we've seen this is parkland that we do an easement, or if we have a piece of land, say the water plant, where we grant an easement across there. So I would say if you want to strike B, it's so rare that it happens that that really wouldn't be a problem for at least me. I'm not sure if Chris or Gina have other opinions.
Okay. Since we're on this topic, I'm curious a little bit about whether A would implicate the mayor's authorization in signing plats. I'm thinking that's statutory, but I sign off, I accept easements on the plats. Would the idea of A be that the city administrator would be signing off on plats, or are these 2 different animals? Gina?
Two different, yeah. That would still have to go through the process required by state law.
And that certainly makes sense to me. I'm just wondering if we need to say that, or I'm not, I don't know if that's the conflict there.
The last sentence was intended to do that. Perhaps it didn't accomplish that. Nothing herein may be construed to authorize the city administrator to accept an easement or grant as shown on a subdivision plat until such final plat has been approved by the city pursuant to law.
Well, the problem is, it says the city administrator can't do that until the final plat's been approved. So that sort of, to me, implies that the city administrator is specifically authorized to sign the plat as soon as assuming it's been finally approved. That was the source of my concern. So that's a drafting issue, we're all in agreement that those are 2 animals. We just have to clarify. On this issue, high-level policy, where are we going? Councilmember Denise.
Mayor, I think there may be some benefit to the city and the process for development where the city minister has some authority to accept some easements, but there's also a risk to the city of those acceptance easements if there's an issue with the land or the easement that the city's accepting. So I think it's kind of, if it's a light pole where we need to put a light pole, or ADA sidewalk, those type of things, probably we'd never have an issue. And I don't think there has ever been an issue if easement's been accepted by the city. But I think there are other things that we may want to see. And so to give it a blanket like this, to accept all easements, I'm a little concerned about that we don't know what we don't know yet until it comes in. Yes, I know it's a May, because then we leave it to discretion of the city administrator, put it on the agenda on a particular item. But I think maybe that's something that we need to, as a policy, determine what is the limit, what should be included in this delegation. And that's the whole idea. What are we going to include? If we're going to delegate, what do we do include in delegation?
Okay. Gina or Chris, do we have any idea what other cities do? And then Councilman Purington, you get your hand up on this one? Do we know if this is based on practice?
I'm sorry, the easement portion?
Other cities, do we know what the practice is in other cities on this issue?
No, I have not gathered that information. I do know that Bozeman has a similar provision in their code with regard to the easements, but I haven't polled any of the other cities at this point.
Bozeman, though. Councilman Purington.
Thank you. You know, so when it starts out that the city administrator may, then I think that initially supersedes what council would do. And I keep pushing this because city council members have been elected to represent the public. And if we delegate all of our authority to the city administrator, are we really representing this, the public? So I don't really like the wording in either one of those. And if Debbie's good with striking B, I'm not sure about the striking of A as well. So I actually like it whenever we get some of those easements because we see what's being done. And I think you did say they're on the consent agenda. And if there's questions of those, they come up or they don't. So I think it's good for council to see those. So I'm not real crazy about this section. And I don't know that would have any ramification in us moving forward.
Okay, thank you. We'll try to wrap up on this issue if we can. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you. I have a question for Director Melling. I'm thinking of a particular case where we had an easement that was about an alleyway, and that came before council. It had to do with a proposed, I think it was a zone change for storage units in the Heights, and there was an issue about an easement that was designated as an alleyway or a street that never got built. So my question to you, even if you don't remember that one, sorry, my question to you is, if it were something like the land easement for a development, a business, and it took up part of the right-of-way, and that would be a serious, substantial benefit to the property owner. Does that kind of situation come up very often? And because that's certainly something I think where council would want to know about it, where we're taking up some right-of-way that's a benefit to a particular business as part of a zone change or something. Do those come up very often, and would we hear about it? Thank you.
So more often than not, those are actually encroachments, and those are approved administratively. And then you see the encroachment assessments once a year. So most of the time when there's a private use of the public right-of-way, we grant encroachments, not easements. And we do that administratively.
And again, just to clarify, B only deals with a grant of a utility.
Right. For a public utility.
Yeah, okay, for utilities, okay. All right, where are we at? Councilor Bernice, do you guys want to have a vote on this? And it'd be good to hear from our city administrator. Councilor Bernice and then Chris.
I have, policy-wise, I see as an open book because if it's subject to available funds, if there's $2 million in funds, we've just now authorized him to spend that money on something. So I think number C needs to, I wouldn't agree to an open policy like that.
Okay, Chris, what do you have to say about any of this, including C? There is no limitation on C.
I'm going to stick with A.
Okay.
If the council isn't comfortable with A, I think that clearly defines we're not interested in expanding any administrative authority. And I'm not saying that as a criticism, but let's just be clear. An easement is about as low a bar as there is relative to property. So that's fine. But I just think that's what I'm hearing here. If the consensus is, where you go with your consensus on easement, I think will define if it's to not expand authority, which is fine, then is there any sense in talking about other components of the expansions of authority in this? I would think no, and that we shouldn't waste a lot of time talking about them. We'll just take them all out of the draft. And then you could move over to some of the other issues, like some of the other critical issues. One in particular is ways we dispose of property, which is one that I think we should try to do sooner rather than later. And frankly, even sending it to the ops committee, we may be able to get some direction out of you on that subject here tonight.
So what I'm hearing Chris say is, and I don't disagree with him, let's move on this one. Because I am hearing significant pushback, and I don't know so much of, great concern or distrust over Chris. I don't think that's the case, but this is a new issue. And I guess what I would say is if we don't add this, if you can keep your eyes open for examples of this and bring them to us, say, see, this is something you're approving tonight that you wouldn't have to if we went back to this. And then we can kind of learn as we go.
Absolutely. And let me state this, what I hope would be obvious. This is not at all about me. Whatever you adopt is probably going to be in place for some decades. So it's not about me. It's about the authority and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we'll try to move on, especially back to the issue of disposition of property. Councilmember Gila?
I think it's sort of the big picture. There's levels of magnitude that I think that are important. Like how we buy pens in the city. I don't care about that. It's public money, but it's such a small thing. But when there's really large purchases, then I think that there's an interest in the council. I don't know if there's some way of similarly doing that for easements or other things that we're granting authority to. I mean, I think, there's got to be a limit somewhere. And just, I think what the tools are for determining that limit, I think I would need some guidance from some suggestions but I think we can all agree that there's got to be a limit. We might differ where we think that limit is, but I think it's a limit is important to recognize.
Okay, are we now talking about the $80,000 city administrator authorization? Councilmember Tricky.
I do not consider this to be a change of policy because there already are levels of purchasing that exist within the system that the city administrator can do without going to council. The question is, in my mind, the only question on this issue would be, where do we draw that line for this specific set of things? And I think that the numbers that I've heard that we've talked about so far make sense to me, because I don't think that any property at, $80,000 is going to be, make or break, or I don't see that as being anything incredibly significant. But I'm willing to negotiate the number, but to me, it seems it would be a change of policy to actually take away the city administrator and the administration's ability to conduct business under a certain value level.
Okay, on the policy level of the city administrator discretion, we've got a, whatever you want to call that, a plus or whatever.
Yes.
On that issue or other policy issues? What else do we have to talk about? I'm assuming that the goal here is to pass this on to the committee. So speak against that if you want to say that's not your case. Councilmember Councilmember Shaw, Councilmember Ripsis?
I'm going to speak against that and to say that if we're going to continue with identifying all of our policy issues with this draft, I don't see any need to send this to the Ops Committee.
So, I'm sorry, say that again.
If we succeed at identifying all of the policy issues that are of concern, I don't see any reason why this would need to go to the Ops Committee.
So you, what?
Well, I did, an hour ago, but we're already into it now. So I feel like as long as the policy issues have been identified and we're not going to go through this line by line, redrafting it, I guess I don't see what the purpose would be. I'm assuming this will come back to us for actual approval with a list of here are the items council needs to vote on that were identified tonight. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Councilmember Tricky?
On that issue, actually, I did, I'll bring it up here. I was going to bring it up during the council discussion thing. To me, this really isn't an operations issue. It's a policy issue. And frankly, we shouldn't be throwing everything that is currently, that really is a policy issue at the operations committee to deal with it. I really think that if we're going to break up and do this kind of work, there needs to be a policy committee. And frankly, there are other examples of things that happened recently that I think should have gone through a policy committee before we took action on it.
Okay, what else, Councilmember Owen?
So I guess I'm puzzled because this is already on the agenda for next week and it's been published. And yet there are clearly concerns and issues. So are we taking it off the agenda for next week to give Gina time to respond to what she's heard tonight? I still think, I don't object to this going to the Council Operations Committee because I think this is about how council operates. What is in our agendas? What is coming to us? It is about the scope of work that council gets to do or gets taken away from it. So to me, it seems squarely within the scope that was provided to the committee. Nonetheless, whether it goes to that committee or Gina just gets to mash through what she heard tonight, it strikes me that we've already published something that clearly is not what we're going to be acting on. So what do we do?
So the simple answer is it will be removed from next week's agenda because what we've heard tonight is no indication that any part of it is ready to be adopted.
Anybody disagree with that? I don't think so. So, Councilmember Boyette?
I guess I'll go back to the very beginning when Council Member Neese said that his main concern and mine is the RFP process for disposal of our property. I think to me that's a paramount issue that we need to resolve that because to me that's not how I sell a house. I just sold a house and I didn't use an RFP and I had many people look at it. I don't know if that's number 904, no, 903, but to me, we need to resolve that one before we go any farther. Because it's going to save the city a lot of time and energy and get more people looking at property to buy.
And so what's the main goal there? I think it is to explicitly provide for individual negotiated sale like you would sell your house.
Right. I mean, I put my house up for sale, same as I want to put my city property up for sale without an RFP and take whatever offers come in. But I'm going to put a price out that I want. And then if they want to come in and negotiate a price, that's how you sell property, not with an RFP, which I think reduces the number of people who are going to come out and look at our property to buy.
Yeah, I guess I'm assuming nobody disagrees with that, but do disagree if you do. Councilmember Purington?
Excuse me, and I don't disagree with that. My issue has always been with this, what we went through with the two real estate companies here in Billings that were confused about what they were supposed to do and what their role was going forward. And I think we need to hash that out as part of this ordinance too, is how do we do that? Because we've pretty much said, okay, you can come work for us to sell this property. Do we truly need a real estate company to sell that? As Mike said, can't we just publish it? This is what we have and this is what we want to sell it for and move on.
Chris, can you or Gina address the kind of the current structure and how this is an improvement?
Well, I think what we experienced to great frustration for Kevin in his time is we get stuck doing both. we had this notion that by hiring a broker and them getting a significant commission, they could handle the sale, do all the normal market things you do to sell a piece of property. But our ordinance doesn't function in that world. So there's still a bunch of time being spent by staff, and the buyers are getting frustrated because they don't get to do a normal process. And sometimes the normal process isn't what we should do. I mean, remember, we're talking about all sales of property, and they're all not made equal. But we're also talking about a very long laundry list of small parcels that the communities want to get rid of for over a decade, that have been sitting on our website telling people, maybe not well advertised, but there, and yet we have nobody knocking on our door really saying, oh, I have to have this, other than a couple landowners who say, I'd really like this parcel behind my house. And in fairness, the community I think there is a deliberate difference between a normal process for your home, and that is that whole first step. You advertise to the world, and the elected body makes a decision publicly, do you want to dispose of a piece of property, kind of thing. So in answering your question, Councilmember Purinton, I think opening up the options, that is, I was city manager in Bozeman when we changed to these more broad formats. And in that case, it actually came out of an opposite scenario where the city had bought some property, and there was a lot of public pushback on how it got bought by my predecessor. And so we went through a very extensive community process to come up with a new way to buy and sell property. And it was part of the foundation we have in front of you tonight, to create more options, to get more competition, and to get the public the best return on their asset if the elected body says it's time to dispose of it.
Okay, thank you. So council, we're faced with the question of how you want to proceed. I think there's consensus that we're not prepared to vote on something at our next business meeting, but staff still needs some direction into next steps. The options are just to kick it back to Gina for another draft, come back to us for input, or to the operations committee, or some hybrid other option. What's your pleasure? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think I'm not averse to having Gina come back with something that kind of takes some of this feedback to see where we're at. If there are 6 people who say, absolutely not, we do not want the city administrator to be signing anything under $80,000, then it would be a waste of her time. But the process that we're doing right now is really very difficult. And I think that every time the director for the airport comes up to speak to us, we always, at least 2 council members say, why are we getting such low values for land that seems to have more value? And I think consistently I've heard that. So when, or other ways in other departments, we very often hear that from council. So I think that council needs to understand that the process may be the reason why we're not getting more from that. And there are leases for the airport that come up every 4 or 5 years. So I don't know. If
Okay.
you want to do a straw poll, and then we can just do it.
Sure, so that was sort of a vote for just give back to Gina. Everybody, I guess, would be encouraged to send any further email edits. We just got this, so people haven't necessarily had an opportunity to make detailed comments. So that's Councilmember Joy's proposal. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that I didn't want to, hold Debbie up. That's why I went to the end real quick. But if we're done talking with about 9:08, I would say start at 9:03 and keep going so Gina has more information, because we didn't cover but half of this. And so if the council members want to stay and continue to go through this ordinance so Gina can hear more of the different things that are on there, I think we should continue on. Otherwise, it probably would make better sense to go to an operations committee or some other hybrid policy committee to meet with Gina and go over some of the things as you've identified and I've identified in my notes. And by the way, my notes were very quick because I knew this was coming and I just ran through it, and there's more in there as I've seen as I've run through it.
Okay. And even if you, there's nothing that would prevent anybody from communicating directly with Gina, regardless of what comes out of tonight. So Councilmember Neese's proposal is just to keep the conversation going.
Can we vote on Councilmember Joyce?
If somebody makes a motion, we can. Councilmember Shaw?
I make a motion for us to vote on Councilmember Joy's proposal that we kick it back to Gina to bring back to us potentially at a future work session before we're asked to vote on this. And in
Okay.
the meantime, council can continue to send thoughts and prayers to Gina.
She'll need all the help she can get after tonight's discussion. Second by Councilmember Ripsis. Okay, so now we do have a motion. So that would terminate our discussion for tonight and kick it to Gina, who will produce perfection. Undoubtedly. And if Gina wants to call Councilmember Neese, me, put together her own little focus group, she's welcome to do that. And she might want to do that. Actually, it might be a very good idea. Okay, any discussion on that, on the motion? Is the motion clear? Okay, if in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
I think the ayes have it, so that resolves that one. Okay. Thank you for that effort. Obviously, a lot to chew on here, but some good discussion. That does conclude that item. We have our final item of upcoming items. Oh, I apologize. Yes. Is there any public comment on item number 3 now that we have resolved? No, there isn't. So item number 3 is closed. Item number 4 is just upcoming agenda items. We've already dealt with one of those, it sounds like, Chris. Do you have anything else to tell us about next week or future agendas?
Yes. So my intent here, based on some feedback we've gotten over the past few weeks, is I just want to quickly reference what is currently in our adopted rules of procedures relative to the agenda. And I think the question here under section 2-213 proposed agenda, A, city administrator shall prepare a draft regular meeting agenda and shall provide the same to the mayor and city council members in accordance with an agreed process designed to provide them with sufficient time and opportunity to review the draft agenda and request changes therein prior to its finalization. We can't find anything that indicates that the agreed upon process has ever been designed. What we started doing a few years ago was providing and it's rough, the draft of agendas that are upcoming, work sessions and regular, in emailing them to you on Friday. Every other Friday, I think it's the Friday before a work session. So this morning, the clerk's office, I said, we should just include that in the weekly every week so you see what's coming up. What I thought I would do for tonight is to essentially, but briefly, try to do the next 3 meetings. Why? Because the first meeting's always going to be a packet material that you've already got and it's out. We'll make an adjustment based on this meeting for something there. So there's a half a dozen things I think to highlight a week from now. On consent, 2 important issues. A resolution setting parking rates based on the recommendation coming from the Parking Commission, and an agreement between the city and Riverstone Health for a nurse-family partnership consistent with the adopted budget of $200,000 towards that program. The high points, I hope I did a good job in the cover memo. The first paragraph in the cover memo background says it all. It's $200,000 a year. It's a 3-year contract with 1 2-year extension, and either party can notify each other with 90 days notice without cause to end the agreement. And that's the gist of expanding NFP, Nurse Family Partnership, from 2.5 nurses to a minimum of 2 additional nurses for the program. The other items on the agenda for next week under your regular agenda, the small cell issue relative to setting that up per the work session we had a few weeks ago. Phase 3, there's a Phase 3 zoning text amendments. There's a series of those coming through that have coming recommended to you from the planning board. We will remove property acquisition disposition, and so we'll just need a motion to do that. And then last, Park 1 ground retail lease, that the recommendation from the operations committee is that we not accept the offer on that purchase. So we'll asking you guys to close that out so that those who've made offers know where they stand. That's next week's agenda, the highlights of next week. The work session for October 2, we got stormwater program coming. That's come through the Budget and Finance Committee. You're going to see it in its full kind of high level. A resolution on SIDs. We've come across some conflicts, for the lack of a better term, or alignment we want to make between what's in our administrative order versus what is in our SID process. Debbie and I may not be as confident, but we read earlier tonight, we said we think that'll take 10 minutes. Billings, MPO, Transportation Improvement Plan. Those are the three things on that work session. Homefront asked to be removed from tonight, and they said they're not ready to come in early October to talk about overall housing strategy. So that's the work session, October 2. And then on October 9th, which would be the next regular meeting, the only pieces to highlight here so far are they actually were the items that were removed from our agenda a few weeks ago related to the budget. So there are 5 special improvement districts we needed. There was a advertising issue. Those are correctly advertised and ready for approval, and Parks Maintenance District annual assessments. Both of those consistent with the budget. So that is what we've got right now. I will tell you, right, your staff team has a tactical meeting every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. 10 to 11:30 is what we have on our calendars. One of the things we do in that meeting is we look over these agendas. We try to look about 4 to 6 weeks out, and we make adjustments every Tuesday. And obviously, they tend to be more firm the closer they are to us. And the further you get out, the more speculative they are as to whether it's something pretty black and white because it's a timeline from a statutory requirement on like land use issues, or it has flexibility of staff time and availability, and are we ready to go? And that's what I've got for those 3.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So, Council, part of the purpose of this discussion is to give you a chance to influence or ask questions about it. So, saw Councilmember Neese's hand, Purinton's hands, and Councilmember Rowan's hand.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, since you're still here, would you mind giving us an overview of what we're looking at approving on the small cell right-of-way? Is this something that's, well, the reason I'm bringing this up is, you know, we had the this recent company come in and TDS come in and go ahead and put in the right-of-way, and I've had lots of complaints. They started up in the Heights, and so Jennifer and I fielded a lot of complaints, and so now we're talking about more companies coming and do work in the right-of-way. Even though it's city property, it tends to cause some disruption in the neighborhoods. And I know this is federally probably required. And so what control, is this going to address what control we do have as a city, or what is this that we're going to be looking at? Because this is the first, well, I think we've talked about it, but this is now final?
And I apologize, Councilor Dees, I'm just going to make kind of the obvious point, which is that and there's nothing improper at all with your question at all, but the purpose of this discussion will always be agenda setting. And because the public hasn't had notice of a specific topic, we need to be careful not to get in too deep or making kind of mini decisions on anything. But I think that's obvious, but I just want to state that.
Thank you,
kind of
Mary.
for the record.
And probably my point would be to make sure that we understand it, that it's now, because it's coming to us, because we haven't seen the draft. We haven't been involved in any meetings about this. And so it wasn't, so I just want to make sure that.
Which is fine. It also gives the public a better idea what's coming down the pipe too.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Thank you, Debbie.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Okay.
I wasn't going to let you off the hook.
Not sure what I'm, okay. So what you'll see is the ordinance, which I brought to the work session. It's one sentence that changes in the ordinance. And then the resolution is the language that I presented at the resolution that talks about developing standards and developing a permit process and developing a license. So those are the two things you'll see.
Okay, standards. So there'll be some standards they have to adhere to.
Yes, the standards are developed administratively. The resolution defines that we need to develop them. So the resolution is relatively vague.
Okay, so the standards will be developed later.
Well, they're already developed, but yes.
Will we see those standards then?
I can certainly send them out.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Pearson. Councilor Rowan?
So Chris, it seems like October 2nd, that work session, something was dropped out of that one. And I wondered if we could ask that Nancy Van Maren to come and discuss the resettlement program here in Billings, because we've been getting some information on it or questions about it.
Sure.
The news report was not well done, is my understanding from Nancy. And so I think those clarifications need to be had.
So they're not available to come on the 2nd. We are talking with them. I had a conversation Friday afternoon and then a couple text exchanges over the weekend about the week of the next week, the week of the 9th. They would like to have the gentleman from Denver up. And so the conversation is, frankly, I've asked them, do we want to look at coming here for a special presentation formally with the council, or do we want to do, please give me some grace here, I'm going to use this term broadly, a town hall type or a meeting, a public meeting at the library community room where that would be the purpose of the meeting. The public would be invited and there would be more time there than what we'll see on a Monday night tied to one of our agendas. I've asked them that question. Maybe you want to say to me, no, I want them to be put on an agenda and we could do that. That would be the week that they have so far indicated that they could get the people here who they would want here available for the conversation.
So as a follow-up, Mr. Mayor, I would say that council should have them here in council chambers. I think for them to make those arrangements for the city to do a town hall or whatever, I think that would be on them. I don't think it'd be on the city council to do that.
Just to clarify, Councilor Owen, did you have any concern with it happen, or Councilor Pearson, that following week when the guy who actually knows what he's talking about would be around? That's okay.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
The time, on the timing. Okay, okay. Councilor Owen?
Just a couple things briefly. Reminder, Chris and Debbie, that during the budget committee consideration of the stormwater, we had asked for a slide to be included in the presentation that sort of gave us the holistic picture of the cost of development that had gone up. I think the presentations we saw had the public works side, but we had asked for like building fee increases and all those things so that we could comprehensively see over the last, I think we said year, 18 months, how much we've raised the cost of development. Do you recall that conversation?
Yep.
Okay. And then I think the presentations on stormwater are really good. I know sometimes we don't always get presentations in advance. I think it's really important that we get this one on Friday when the work session packet comes out.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The other thing the committee had asked us to do was write up a report, and we're almost done with that. So you'll get that this week, and it's really, really long, so you'll be happy.
I can't wait.
It's so good.
And then the last thing, I guess, Mayor, I'm not sure if you want to answer this or Chris, but I know there's been this sort of back and forth about how initiatives get raised. If a draft agenda is being sent out, is that the right time for a council member to say, listen, I would like to raise this initiative, so please put it on the agenda? Is that sort of what we would hope to see, or have we not decided that yet?
I don't think we have decided that. My only point was giving the public some notice is a good idea.
Yeah.
So however that would happen would be my recommendation, I guess. Okay, anything else on item number 4? Any public comment on item number 4? Lo and behold, no. Council discussion. Councilmember Purington?
Thank you. This past week, I met with a constituent with Chris and Wyeth, and I'll just be real honest, I'm not a fan of initiative process, but so what the process, or what the question at hand is, cell tower locations. These are the larger cells, the WCFs or whatever, I think, in our ordinance. And this constituent brought up an issue with the separation of cell towers from parks and trails, residential, and schools. And I thought that she had some good things to say. So I'm just going to say at this point, I'm going to look into what some other communities in Billings are doing with that, and also outside of Billings, or outside of Montana, you know, just a couple of instances, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But Wyeth was amenable to looking at those as a text amendment if we need to go. Who knows how long it'll take? That's why I don't want to text our initiative, because sometimes those take longer. So I'm just saying that I will come to you whenever I get that information, and if you want the city or the staff, planning staff, to move forward on that, you know, I would just like kind of a straw vote on that one too, before staff spends any time on it. So that's kind of the way I'm wanting to proceed with this. If there's a major foul called on it, let me know, and I'll draft it into an initiative. But I think with the initiative, you have to put in staff time. I don't want staff time. I'll do that, and then, you know, staff can look at it.
Thank you, Councilor Purington. My understanding is the initiatives are, if there's a problem getting staff to put something on an initiative, that way we have a way to push an issue, enforce an issue. But if Chris is good, he's the keeper of the agenda with his department heads, why make an initiative if we can just get it on an initiative, or just get it on an agenda at a good time? My take on it. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, and this is not a follow-up to Councilmember Purington. So if Councilmember Neese has something that's a follow-up to Councilmember Purington.
Do you have something new or something that was related?
I had something new. You go right ahead.
Thank
and
you.
I can go next.
Oh, thank you, because you're going to love what I've got. You're
Okay.
really going to love it. So I don't like our subcommittees. I really don't. They're creeping. RFPs now go through a subcommittee. Was the planning for RFPs go through a subcommittee, or is it just the approval of which RFP? I don't even understand that. And you know, mission creep didn't work out very well in Vietnam either. So ordinances go through the committee, subcommittee, operations subcommittee. Let's see, I haven't got all of them, but because I'm not quite sure which ones all go through there. So, Councilmember Cherokee had put forward an initiative to start to kind of look at this. I don't think that this is something that we should ignore, for the simple reason that if we're going to have subcommittees of drafting RFPs, then which council members and how wards are represented becomes more important. If the budget is going to be gone, the budget committee is going to go through the budget, and there are amendments or a process where the budget then comes as a recommendation to a committee that has been changed, then each ward should have a representative on those. Otherwise, we are creating maybe some real inequality. And so I'm all for, let's move forward and figure out what our committee should be. And I've already expressed I guess I've expressed that the local affairs committee doesn't really roll very well. So let's go forward. I don't think the committees are a bad idea, but I think they do need to have some rework in order to make them equitable and at the same time effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dees?
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, I want to talk to you about the city administrator's weekly reports. I enjoy reading them. There's a lot of good information about the city, but I miss hearing more content about what you are doing around the city. Because I think when we first started those, we heard really about what you're doing, where, what meetings you're going to, who have you, kind of what you're doing. So I would just ask, for the city to see what you're doing a little bit more of in those. I mean, I think they do a good job of putting a lot of stuff in there. Sometimes they're a little bit long, but I think overall, it's good to see those. I think I see the public look at those often and make comments on them. But if you could include a little more about you and what you're doing in the city, I think it would be helpful. I just asked that. Just one council member. If any others want to join in on me, I would appreciate it, because I think you do a lot around the city and we just don't know and the people don't know what you're doing.
Thank you. Councilman Puritan?
Just in response to Denise's query about the subcommittees, I don't know if we were planning on evaluating those at our next retreat. Was there a time period? Do we need to set a time period for that?
It is.
So when is that?
It's on the work session for the 16th.
Oh,
I'm sorry. It's on the work session for the 16th.
Of October?
Yep.
Oh, I'll be here.
All right, very good. Just one piece of good news that was in the weekly, and I had the good fortune to see Steve McConnell, our city forester, over the weekend, and he mentioned this as well. The city has gotten this $1 million federal grant for urban forestry trees in underprivileged neighborhoods and in environmentally deprived neighborhoods where you don't have trees, in particular eBird. So just imagine what the eBird area between downtown and Metra could look like with a couple thousand trees or even a couple hundred trees. And it truly could be transformational for that part of town, which is really exciting. So thank you, Washington, D.C.
And if I could just add, Mayor, that was a great example, I guess, 3 or 4 days late in the announcement, in that Thorn Run absolutely coached us. We were going to apply for just a planning grant to get our plan together first, and they said, you will miss the boat if you don't get a broader one in. And they were absolutely right. We did it, and it resulted in $1 million. So there's their first absolute direct return to the community. There's another one they've told us when they were here last week. You can't miss this opportunity. The due date is the 28th of this month, and so Debbie, Wyeth, and our new grants coordinator, which is on staff now, are working to meet this deadline, because they too were able to communicate the kind of dollars that are in the program are substantial, and we think you really will compete well. So there's a couple of direct instances where, one, they have made a difference, and I think the second one we'll see if it does as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that information. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? No, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.